And just press the button, we're just waiting.
We'll be live.
So there's like a bit of a time lag. Our equipment's very old.
The membership.
I was just going to say that.
No, certainly feel it will today. Right. Okay, I think we are.
That's we're
live now,
We're live. Okay, great. We are live. Welcome, members and everybody else, to the 80th meeting of the Committee for Finance in the 22 to 27 mandate. Members, the committee meeting will be recorded and broadcast throughout Parliament buildings and online. As always, we have quite a few people in the public gallery to say you're all very welcome. We have quadrupled or more our usual attendance because we have colleagues from the Youth Assembly who are, first of all, giving us evidence in a second, but also are tending to listen. You're all very welcome. We also have a couple of attendees who are work experience / interning with colleagues. We have James McNellis. James is from up from Kildare. You're very welcome, I believe. Is that right? And we also have Adam Trimble, who is at the University of Newcastle. So both very welcome to our proceedings. Now, members, we have agenda item 1 is apologies. I should say, by the way, if anyone has their phone, keep it on silent or airplane mode. Anybody who, and it's not permitted to take photos or record anything, but it's all online, guys, so do go in and watch afterwards and take screen grabs and for social media, etc. So agenda item 1 is apologies. We have apologies from Steve Aiken and Owen Tennyson. Jerry Carroll will join us via Zoom. Agenda item 2, declaration of interests. Does anybody have an interest they wish to declare? No.
Thank you.
Okay, agenda item 3 is the Marriage and Civil Partnership Bill, an oral briefing from the Youth Assembly. If members are agreed, Hansard will report on this session. Members, at page 7 of the meeting pack, there's a clerk's memo on the oral briefing from the Youth Assembly. Background papers on the relevant issues are also provided for members' reference. So there's a briefing paper on the bill which has been produced by the Youth Assembly. That is at page 10. Pardon me. There are other items, quite a few items which have come in the last little while. I'm not going to run through them all, but I'm not going to list every single one, but they are all there. So I think all or most of the major, certainly Christian denominations, have given us evidence. So has the Human Rights Commission. So have NI Humanists. They've provided a supplementary briefing. Professor Sandberg, who's an academic from the University of Cardiff, the Christian Institute, the GRO, NSPCC, Law Society, and a couple of organisations have effectively offered us nil returns, but helpful that they told us they were giving us nil return. Rather than run through absolutely all of those, they are there for members' consideration. There are issues we will want to discuss and consider because there are several significant things which come up and points particularly, I think it's fair to say, around the question which NI Humanists have raised, which is around registration / how one defines organisations which can do or not do belief ceremonies. And in any case, if members are agreed, we will add all these written submissions to our evidence base for the committee stage. We will also send them to the department for views, and I think that will be important for us to get clarity on the department's position, specifically around the debate around the Scottish model versus the Dublin model. I think it's fair to say around registration and how that works. We have received a significant amount of written submissions, and the call for evidence is closed. We agreed to consider further oral evidence sessions. At this point, we'll discuss who we might want to ask for oral evidence session a bit later on. We have pretty detailed written evidence. I don't think we need to take oral evidence from all of the people whom we have written evidence from because they'll have summarised their views, but we will, I think, want to take some additional oral briefing. Nevertheless, we're going to move into oral briefing now at the Youth Assembly. We have 5 members of the Youth Assembly who have very kindly come to brief us following the written submission they've made. We have Logan Scott McKinley, Landon Woodfield, Mia Hall, Jennifer Suter, and Lawrence Assar. I don't have your respective constituencies, guys. I know you are all represent constituencies. I don't know if anybody, if it comes up, you're more than welcome to.
Chair, technically they don't represent a constituency. We have a random selection that meets other criteria. But it might be interesting when they introduce themselves just to hear where they're from.
Good. That would be interesting. Yes. So it would be good to get an opening statement, and I don't know if one of you has decided who's going to start the opening statement. Yourself, Landon. Please go ahead. Thank you all very much, guys. We really appreciate you coming in.
Thank you to the Committee for Finance for meeting with us today. My name is Landon and I'm a member of the Northern Ireland Youth Assembly. I will begin by providing a brief background to the Youth Assembly. The Youth Assembly, established in June 2021, comprises 90 diverse members aged 12 to 16 from all constituencies, with representation from Section 75 groups including gender, sexuality, disability, race, political opinion, plus care experienced young people and those on free school meals. My fellow Youth Assembly members and I have been in our roles since November 2025. The Youth Assembly has three main functions. First, we engage directly with the Northern Ireland Assembly and its committees on inquiries and legislative scrutiny. Second, we conduct our own committee-led project work. We meet with experts, undertake our own research, and present findings to Assembly committees and ministers. Our three committees for this mandate are Education, who are looking at the impact of hidden school fees, Health, who are looking at social media addiction, and Rights and Equality, who are examining a topic on ending violence against women and girls from the perspective of young men. And third, we work with government departments and other youth organisations on issues that affect young people's lives. On the 6th of May 2026, we met online with the clerk and senior assistant clerk to consider the Marriage and Civil Partnership Bill. Today, we'll present the key findings from that discussion. The full report has already been sent and should be in your packs. I will now hand over to Maya, who will explore young people's awareness of the issue and the views on non-religious ceremonies.
Thanks, Landon.
Good afternoon. My name is Maya, and I will begin by discussing awareness and views on non-religious marriage ceremonies. Before taking part in the session, most Youth Assembly members had limited knowledge of laws around marriage and civil partnerships. 65% said they knew a little, and 30% said they knew not much. This highlights the importance of improving awareness and understanding of these issues amongst young people. Members suggested that schools should play a greater role in teaching young people about relationships, consent, and forced marriage, so that they understand their rights and know where to seek help. We then explored whether couples who should be able to get married in a non-religious belief ceremony, such as a humanist ceremony, and have it legally recognised. 75% of members supported this proposal, showing strong backing for greater inclusivity and choice. Members felt that all people should be treated equally before the law, regardless of their beliefs. However, 15% opposed the idea and 10% were unsure, with some raising questions about how non-religious ceremonies would operate alongside traditional practices. Overall, members support expanding choice in how people get married, but recognise the need for clarity and balance. I will now hand over to Jennifer, who will discuss equality in the law and future regulation.
My name is Jennifer, and the next area we will be exploring is equality in the law and flexibility in the proposed bill. Youth Assembly members showed strong support for treating religious and non-religious marriages equally. 90% agreed with this approach. Members saw this as an important step in promoting fairness and ensuring the law reflects a diverse society. However, a small number raised concerns about maintaining the independence of religious institutions, highlighting the need to respect freedom of religion alongside equality. We also discussed the proposal allowing the government to set rules in the future about which organisations can conduct marriages. 81% of members supported this flexibility, recognising that laws may need to adapt over time to reflect changing societal needs. That said, 19% were unsure, suggesting that some young people would like more detail about how these powers would be used. The Youth Assembly recognises that the regulations will come later, so we have some concerns about what the criteria will be for an organisation to be able to offer marriages. I will now hand over to Logan, who will focus on the proposed change to the minimum age of marriage.
My name is Logan from Mid Ulster. and I'm going to be discussing the proposal to raise the minimum age of marriage and civil partnerships to 18. This proposal received overwhelming support from Youth Assembly members, with 95% agreeing that the minimum age should be increased. Members identified several benefits. Firstly, safeguarding and protection were key themes. Many felt the change would help prevent child and forced marriages and would better protect young people's rights. This reflects the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child, particularly Article 19, which emphasizes the need to protect children from harm and exploitation. Secondly, members highlighted the importance of maturity and informed decision-making. Marriage is a significant commitment, and members felt that individuals should have the time to fully understand its implications. Some also suggested that raising the age could lead to more stable and long-lasting relationships. However, concerns, of course, were also raised. Some members questioned whether 18 is still too young, suggesting the age could be further increased to 21. Others highlighted potential unintended consequences, such as marriages taking place abroad or uncertainty regarding how international cases would be handled. Overall, while members strongly supported raising the age, they also emphasized the importance of clear guidance, enforcement, and ongoing safeguarding measures. I will now hand over to Lawrence, who will discuss forced marriage and conclude on behalf of the Youth Assembly.
My name is Lawrence, and I will conclude by addressing forced marriage and overall views on the bill. Youth Assembly members were unanimous on their view of forcing or pressuring someone under the age of 18 into marriage should be a criminal offence. 100% of members agree with this. When asked overall the Assembly should pass the bill, 95% of the members said yes, while some felt the changes could strengthen the bill, such as raising the age and further on expanding protections. There is a clear support on overall direction. In summary, the Youth Assembly supports the aims of Marriage and Civil Right Partnership Bill. Members value fairness and equality and protection, and believe this legislation has the potential to improve outcomes for young people in line with children's rights principles. At the same time, we encourage the committee to consider areas for refinement, including safeguarding, education, and clarity around implementation. Thank you for listening. We welcome your questions.
Well, first of all, thank you very much, guys. That was a lesson in concision, and I think we could probably point to your opening statements and some of our other witnesses in terms of being more concise, and probably some of our members, including myself. So thank you very much. So a few things arise there that interesting, I suppose, overall, that there is very strong support for the bill. A couple of the points you've raised are points that other people that came out for other people. I'll just ask what I'll address. I'll ask a couple of questions. I'll address them to the people who raised that particular bit. But if someone else feels has something to chip in, just chip in. Don't be too formal about it. So Jennifer, Jennifer's now. You said that at 95% supported a provision for belief marriage, and that was a fairly clear and widespread view that should be allowed. Were there any other specific views people gave as to why they felt that should be the case?
As in, why do we think there needs to be a separation, or?
No, simply because obviously all it's doing is formalising what kind of in the law what exists at the minute, which is that non-religious organisations have the ability to perform weddings. I suppose I'm just asking, did any of the members of the Youth Assembly were there any specific view? Did they give anything more specific about that area or any particular opinions on it?
I don't think we looked too much into the details of what the legislation about that would be.
Okay.
But it is a point that would be a good thing to look into, and I think as a Youth Assembly we could look into it.
There's a support for the principle rather than the broad principle of it. Okay. So one point that came up, Maya, I think in your evidence was about the very strong support for removing. Basically, people overwhelmingly supported, as well as the belief marriage, the raising the minimum age of marriage to 18. Now, you guys are examples of people who are very mature and wise, who are under the age of 18. So I suppose I'm interested, why did the Youth Assembly? Why is the Youth Assembly so certain that it should be raised to 18? Given, you know, one might say you guys are a lesson that people who are under 18 can be very mature and thoughtful. Why do you think everybody was so supportive of moving it up to 18?
I think everyone is very supportive. Is mostly based off maturity, because especially in some parts of Northern Ireland it might take longer, but I do believe the support in changing the age of marriage is
very consistent. Okay, and then one final question from myself is around Logan. Logan, you talked about again widespread support for forced marriage being a crime. Was there any of the particular discussions that happened around that, or any specific observations, I suppose, that young people had?
I think the general consensus among the Youth Assembly was that we should be doing as much as possible to ensure that young people are protected and that people aren't forced into these marriages. And the general consensus did seem to be this is a very important factor in keeping people safe and making sure everyone is treated equally.
Sure. Then one final point that just occurred to me, and I don't know whether it was Landon or someone else that mentioned it, was about the sense of it being part of a broader knowledge of marriage law. Kind of seemed to prompt within the Youth Assembly a conversation about broader awareness of issues around relationships, healthy relationships, consent, and all of those things. Is that fair to say that the Youth Assembly members were kind of prompted to, I guess, consider these questions about whether you should be allowed to marry at 16 and 17 in the context of having a conversation about education on relationships more broadly?
Yes, so the Youth Assembly believe that a knowledge of, as you say, like relationship and sexual education should be more successfully taught in subjects such as like learning for life and work, and that I think the reason for why the vast majority of us were wanted that for it to be raised to 18 is to prevent child marriages. And because I know from even people outside of the Youth Assembly, like a friend of mine in school literally yesterday did a presentation about child marriages across the world. So it is an ongoing and a very prominent issue that we can stomp it out in Northern Ireland at least.
Hopefully. Thank you very much, guys. And I'm going to bring in a couple of other members who've got questions. The Deputy Chair first.
Yeah, thanks very much, and thank you all for being here. It's great to have the Youth Assembly, and especially on something that's affecting young people, so your perspective is so important. Sometimes we look on and just because you're not in the heart of it, you think about it a very, very different way. I represent the South Down area. I don't know if anybody's from South Down. No, I'll get more brought in the next time. But no, it is brilliant to see you here and just to get that spread from across Northern Ireland. In terms of just off the bill, you touched a little bit on it, but I think that from what you're saying, you know, it's the feeling of the Youth Assembly that there is a very much an appreciation of how serious marriage is. It would have been a concern of mine through some of the engagement I've had that if you don't keep the solemn nature of the serious contract law that you're entering in at the forefront of this marriage, and it becomes too widespread, lighthearted, you know, a bit of a party, you're not necessarily taking as serious what you're entering into. So I just wanted to just ask you in terms of that, was that the feeling coming through from the Youth Assembly? Do you think there is very much an understanding and appreciation from young people that whenever, you know, you get married or have a civil partnership, there's a serious legal contract, there's serious legal consequences, and you know, you're not just going to walk away from this again. There's a serious process there. You think it was that gravity? Or fully appreciate it?
We talked about this online in our discussion, and it wasn't mentioned in our speeches there, but we did talk about the science behind the brain development and how your brain doesn't fully develop until you're maybe 25, maybe even 30. And we discussed about how being able to get married at 16, and as you mentioned, it's such a big commitment and there's so many legalities around it, that one of the reasons we think it should be raised to 18, if not higher, is because you need to let the brain develop to allow for that consent to become like a properly thought out choice, instead of I'm 16 and I want to marry this person, and you're not really thinking about how it could affect you in the future as you change as a person.
No, absolutely. No, it's good to hear you having those conversations. I think it might have been yourself, Jennifer, but somebody definitely gave evidence around the criteria of who's able to perform the ceremony. That was yourself. So what sort of ideas did you have around that?
We didn't really discuss, we didn't go into extreme detail about how those marriages would be carried out, but we did still think that it should be religious marriages and non-religious marriages should be treated equally, but they should be allowed to have their own separate laws and rules. But you shouldn't try and bundle them all into one big mess. Instead, you do have religious marriages can be treated equally to non-religious marriages, but they're still allowed to do it differently.
No, that's great to hear. Anybody else have anything you want to add? Any of that? No.
What you said earlier about, marrying young, I personally believe, like, if you meet someone and you think they'll love your life, and you meet them when you're, just say 18 is what we're change it to, if you meet them at 18 and you decide to get married, and then 2 years later you're like, oh, I don't really like this person, and the divorce could ruin someone's life because of all you have to split everything in half, and whoever gets this and that. So I personally believe that it should be higher, and for that specific reason.
I appreciate that. Thank you very much. Thanks, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Brian Kingston.
Okay. Well, thank you again for your attendance today and for your consideration on this matter. It's very helpful for us to have the voice of young people, because this affects your age group, and I think you've approached it in a very mature way. I thought you might have had more people saying we want the freedom to do what we want to do, but I think you've pointed to the right things about having maturity and avoiding coercion, enforced marriage and child marriage, and that's been our approach. Do you feel your views are representative of young people more generally? Do you feel other people would recognise that there is a move, recognising that early marriage particularly disadvantages young women? So I don't know. Do you feel your views are representative of wider young people?
Yeah, I would say that because the Youth Assembly is a diverse group made up of multiple different people with different religious beliefs, different backgrounds, and that widespread diversity through us all being taken into account, I think does, as the Youth Assembly, we think it does show a widespread opinion, and that we all seem to agree with the fact that it can target vulnerable women, for example, and we all seem to agree that it is an issue and that it does need to be looked at.
Okay. I'll take that as representative. No, I am encouraged by your responses, and as Dan was saying, one of our concerns is broadening out who can conduct marriages, just ensuring that the solemnity of marriage as a commitment is maintained, and in the era of married at first sight and so on, that there's a danger. Obviously, marriages are always joyous affairs, but there's also that solemnity in the ceremony, and people understanding that commitment, whether in a religious or non-religious setting. So we would have a slight concern that it can become too broad, and that belief can be interpreted too liberally, and you can just get more and more wacky versions of marriage. So that's something we want to just ensure that it is seen as a serious commitment, both personally, legally, and in terms of just people's life intended as a lifelong commitment. Would you have appreciation of that?
think the Youth Assembly does, of course, recognise that marriage is a very serious affair and it can have lifelong impacts. And I think that is a large part of the reason why we feel that the minimum age for marriage and civil partnerships should be raised to 18 due to how impactful of a commitment this is.
And just in terms of who is allowed to conduct marriages, that's just our concern, to ensure that it is maintained as a set solemnity.
Youth Assembly generally showed strong support for equality between religious and non-religious marriages, with the majority of members saying that they agree or strongly agree that religious and non-religious should be treated equally, with many feeling this is about fairness and equal rights for different beliefs. And although while there is some recognition for concerns about religious freedom, the general consensus does seem to be that there is a strong support for that equality and broad recognition of different marriages.
Last question, not really to do with the bill itself. Do you feel that marriage as an institution has a strong future among your own age group? Is it something people discuss, or is it too far in the future? Do you think that people around your age group, what is their view on marriage? Do more see themselves getting married or not getting married? This is just out of interest.
Well, I don't think our age group between really 12 and 16, which is our Youth Assembly age group, we wouldn't really be talking about marriage, but I would say when it gets around 17 and 18, that's when like someone proposed at my like a school dance or something, and like they were higher sixth form and all. So yeah, no, I don't think really our age group, but just slightly higher, that's when it kind of starts talking.
Mm-hmm. I think it has an important place in society. Yeah. Okay, that's fine.
Cheers, guys. Big questions, but I really wanted Deirdre Hargey.
Thank you. Well, I'm 46 and I'm still not talking about marriage. So
You're young yet.
You win some, you lose some. But no, thank you very much, and really brilliant presentation. So fair play to you, and you have obviously had a good bit of discussion. Who thought this topic would be so interesting? But it is an important area, as you say, and I suppose I wanted to touch on the bit around education, and I mean, a couple of you touched on the whole issue of consent and knowing what you're going into for those that do make the choice for marriage, but just the importance of that. And are there other things that you would like to see or you think needs to happen in terms of more education and informing young people if they are making this decision? And I think Matthew touched on it as well, just around relationship education, sexual health education, you know, talking about the issue of consent as well. What impact do you think that has on yourselves as young people who may be looking at these choices going forward?
The Youth Assembly evidence did show that most people had, before our online session, had very low or limited knowledge of things regarding marriage and that sort of area. And we feel this could be because it is not widely taught in school, and we feel that young people do need to understand their rights and choices in relation to marriage and other issues. We feel this might mean there is a need for better education and awareness in school settings, and many members suggested including it in the curriculum, for example, within Learning for Life and Work.
Thank you. Anybody else? Or no, it's me, Chair.
Thank you, guys. Nobody else has indicated they want to ask a question. That's been really useful for us, I think, to give us a sense of the views of a group of people who are going to be very directly impacted by this legislation should it pass. You won't be able to get married, although by the time, some of you probably will be 18 by the time the marriage passes. So, but you're under 18 now. That was really helpful. So thank you very much. Maybe get my notes so I remember everyone's name. Thank you all individually. Thank you, Logan, Landon, Maya, Jennifer, and Lawrence. And hopefully you will be back here giving evidence again, either in the Youth Assembly or perhaps even in some other capacity in the future. You may even be on this side asking someone else questions. We fingers crossed, because you're all very impressive. So thank you very much for all the work that went in, and thank you for coming and giving us evidence.
Okay.
Okay. So, members. I don't think we have any specific bits of information that we require. I don't have anything anyway that's new following that briefing. There may be other things that arise from some of the other written evidence we've taken. But we'll go into closed session now if members are content to talk about that. So,
Senate Chamber. Sound. 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 Senate Chamber. Sound.
Enough to go back in? Thanks,
We've got the FDA.
Yes, sir. They were hovering outside.
Okay, members, so we're back in open session. We've had a brief discussion about some of the written evidence we've received and future evidence sessions on marriage and civil partnership. We have agreed that we will hear from the NI humanists in, it's supposed to be scheduled, but it should be after summer.
We're looking at September, yes, Chair, and the same with the NICI as well.
And we have,
September.
and Nikki, we have significant evidence which people can refer to, and I would encourage members to, it'll all be published, and we will be sending all of it, all of the responses from, we got some nil returns, but from the various commissions, or from, well, one commission, the Human Rights Commission, all the mainline, as it were, Christian churches, and the humanists, they will all be forwarded to the department for response. Okay, members are agreed, all that. Now, agenda item 4 is the FDA oral briefing. So, members, there's a clerk's, at page 90 of the meeting pack, there's a clerk's memo. And there's also an FDA submission at page 93. There's some relevant Hansard transcripts. Members, I'm sure, agree that Hansard will report on this session too. Thank you, Hansard, for patience today. And we'll add previous transcripts, the ones with NIPSA and our own deliberations from the 3rd of June to the evidence base, if members are content. So welcome Robert Murtagh, who is National Officer for the FDA, otherwise known as the First Division Association. No, not anymore?
Not anymore, no.
Not anymore, okay.
Just the FDA.
Just the FDA, I used to, okay. Well, the FDA is a trade union for, obviously, senior managers in the senior civil service. So anyway, you're very welcome, Robert, and please do make an opening statement, and members indicate if you want to ask questions.
Thank you, Chair and Committee. Chair, with your indulgence, can I begin very briefly by commenting on the appalling scenes across Belfast and Northern Ireland last week? These scenes had a very real impact on our ethnic minority members who were both scared and angry at what unfolded. People who call this place home, who have worked for the civil service for decades, delivering public services to the people here, made to feel like they didn't belong. And I think it underlines why equality, diversity and inclusion policies and initiatives in our workplaces like the civil service are so important. The workplace shouldn't just be free from the indignity of discrimination and prejudice. It should positively promote inclusion and diversity, ensuring everyone can succeed in their careers and working lives. And we welcome the message sent by the head of the civil service last week, underlining the service's commitment to diversity and signposting to various places for support, including the staff networks. And I just wanted to take that opportunity while I was here to say that, so thank you. And thank you for the opportunity to be here and to provide evidence on behalf of the FDA. As you said, we represent grade 7s and above in the civil service, including the senior civil service, and we also represent prosecutors in the PPS. We are the only union representing officials across all devolved governments of the UK. We are an independent trade union and we are impartial. We don't take political positions. Our approach to this inquiry is to be as constructive as we possibly can, with a clear focus on how do we ensure the civil service is equipped, supported and enabled to deliver better outcomes for the public. But our message is simple. You cannot separate the performance and culture of the civil service from the political and governance environment in which it operates. Our system of government here creates structural challenges that are fundamentally different to elsewhere in the UK. There is no single centre of gravity, no collective responsibility, and departments operate with a high degree of independence. That makes prioritisation, cross-cutting work and long-term planning inherently more difficult. And those are not theoretical concerns, they have very real consequences for delivery. Political instability, periods without a functioning executive and the absence of multi-year budgets have significantly constrained the civil service's ability to plan and to transform. Added to that, exogenous shocks like COVID and Brexit have stretched capacity even further. It's important to recognise that civil service transformation alone cannot resolve the systemic challenges facing government here in Northern Ireland. And I was talking to a former senior official yesterday who said government is hard, government in Northern Ireland is even harder. But I also want to address the tone of the conversation around the civil service. There is at times a tendency to default to criticism of civil servants when outcomes fall short. While scrutiny is absolutely essential and nobody denies that, unconstructive criticism of civil servants who are unable to answer back risks undermining morale and ultimately delivery itself. Civil servants are committed to public service. They work within the framework set by ministers and the executive. When that framework is unclear, unstable or constantly shifting, it creates real pressure on individuals and on teams. To put it plainly, many civil servants feel like they're being pulled from pillar to post, responding to changing priorities, operating without long-term certainty and still expected to deliver at pace. If we want better outcomes, we need a more constructive environment, one that recognises the pressures and supports the workforce to succeed. Because ultimately a demoralised workforce will struggle to deliver reform no matter how well designed it is. And that's why we strongly support the People Strategy. In particular, strategic workforce planning, as outlined in the Audit Office report, is absolutely critical, ensuring we have the right people with the right skills in the right place at the right time. But workforce reform cannot succeed in isolation. It must be matched by political leadership, stability and clear prioritisation. We also need to invest in the future leadership of the civil service. The Graduate Management Programme offers a real opportunity to attract new talent and build the pipeline of future leaders we know is necessary. At present, it's under-resourced. Strengthening it would be a practical, important step forward. On digital transformation, the civil service has low digital maturity but significant opportunity. AI and digital tools can improve services and efficiency, but only if we invest in people as well as technology. That means training, capability and a clear strategic vision that we've outlined in our report with the Fabian Society, Adopt, Innovate and Transform. But technology alone will not transform the civil service. People will. We must also ensure the civil service remains an attractive employer. Pay and conditions need to be competitive. Short-term fixes like bonuses are not a substitute for a long-term sustainable approach. And we should be cautious about simplistic solutions. Cutting staff without reducing demand does not improve efficiency. It creates gaps and pressures. In short, you cannot cut the number of civil servants and expect the same level of delivery. So just to finish up, to allow plenty of time for questions, transformation of the civil service is necessary and it's achievable, but it must be grounded in reality. It can't be like baubles on a Christmas tree with everyone hanging their own individual grievance they have with the civil service. It has to reflect the reality. That means recognising the structural constraints, strengthening our political leadership and investing in our people. Just as importantly, it means fostering a constructive environment where civil servants feel supported, valued and able to focus on delivery, not pulled in competing directions. And we as the FDA stand ready to work in partnership with you as a committee, with the executive, with ministers and with civil service management to support meaningful reform that delivers better outcomes for the people of Northern Ireland. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Robert. That was a really useful opening presentation. So, and thank you for the written presentation, which I would encourage members to view as well, because it is extremely thorough. So just on some of what you raised, both in written and oral terms, you talked about I think your submission talks about exogenous shocks. I particularly like the use of the word exogenous, i.e. things like Brexit and COVID, but also political instability here. Can you say a bit more about the particular conditions of political instability in Northern Ireland, the stop-start government, the collapses, and what particular impact that has on the performance of the civil service?
Yeah. Well, look, I think ultimately, and there's various reports that have underlined this, the best way we get the most out of the civil service is through strong political leadership. It's political leadership that unlocks blockages or unlocks stasis. So I think the political instability that we've seen in terms of when we don't have an executive, but even at times when we do have an executive, we know that does mean some of the big issues that we face, don't get dealt with, and it's as frustrating for civil servants as it is for everyone else. Bear in mind, civil servants are often spending long time working on a particular issue, and then by the time it gets to the executive, it's stalled, if it even gets that far, because if we do have collapse. So I think, and then when we do get periods of collapse, there is this sort of question of, well, what can we actually do? And I think for the likes of permanent secretaries, accounting officers, senior officials, they're spending a lot of time then having to work out what can they do, right? What can they keep going forward? And then what can't they do? What requires a minister to be in place? And then by the time they've worked that out and they're trying then to get on and change, the sort of the teams and change how things are working to reflect that, then we get a period then where maybe the executive and maybe things settle down a bit. Then the executive gets back up and running. Then ministers come in, and rightly so, ministers come in and say, we've got X, Y, and Z. These are the issues we need to deal with. But sometimes I think the expectation is that civil servants are going to be able to deliver what would have been delivered, or would have even been maybe difficult to deliver in a 5-year mandate. Suddenly they're expected to try and deliver that in a 3-year mandate, and I think that does create real pressure and real issues. And obviously I know that one of the issues that's been talked about is around sickness absence, and I think again I think all of this is interconnected. The work-related stress that we know is a significant issue, I think that can in part, maybe not fully, but I think in part can be explained by the stop-start government, the hokey-cokey government that we have, the constant changing of directions. And as I say, even then when the executive is in place, it's not always functioning as optimally as it could be.
Very diplomatically there, that's admirable. Like I know you're not a civil servant yourself, but you're speaking on their behalf today. Just in relation to the stop-start, I don't want to put words in your mouth, and I think in your written presentation you're very careful to say that it's not for the FDA to make a political comment about a political decision, but it sounds like a view might be civil service reform to be meaningful and transformative. And I think you're right to say that civil service reform has to be more than just cutting civil servants. It has to be a genuine process of changing how the machine delivers and operates. But for any form of civil service reform or transformation here to work, it might have to go alongside some form of stormont reform or political reform to make these institutions more durable.
Yeah, so you're right in saying that obviously I'm constrained in terms of what I can say around reform, because I think that is a political question and it's not for us to get into that. But you use the term sort of go alongside. I suppose my argument would be that if we are going to have wider reform, executive reform, then we need to think about what does reform look like in terms of the civil service. I suppose my issue is that and I know one of the things that you have talked about as part of this committee is the structure of the senior civil service and the role of the head of the civil service. So, the head of the civil service, that role, and I think, to be clear, we have to separate the role from the person. Absolutely. And I'm only talking about the role here. It is a different role, so it's not akin to the Permanent Secretary of Scotland or Wales or the Cabinet Secretary because of the structure of our government. So one of the things that we said in the written evidence is that actually, you can't really change that role. If for example, if you wanted to create the head of the civil service as the principal accounting officer for the executive, well, you can't do that unless you are looking at wider reform. And I would say the wider reform comes first. So you're saying, I think that this, the civil service reform goes side by side. I suppose I would say the civil service will reform based on whatever reform is happening at the executive level, whether that is whether I like it or not, or whether civil servants like it or not. So what we have to do, and I think for this inquiry, is what can the civil service do in terms of transformation within the constitutional framework that we do have, that does exist. And I think what I will be clear in saying is that does create a cap on limitations, or a cap in terms of what we maybe would want to see in terms of better delivery and better outcomes, because it isn't controversial. And I don't think I am stretching impartiality here to say we know that our structure was designed to put survivability and stability over effectiveness. That I don't think that's a controversial thing to say. Okay. We all recognise that. Yeah.
Okay. So following on from that, then, the kind of constitutional change that would be required, and you're not advocating it, to be clear, and I acknowledge that, and nor are you advocating against it, because those are political decisions. But, for example, that would mean some greater degree of collective executive responsibility. Yes. In order for, in your view, or in the view of the FDA, there to be a context in which you could have a head of the civil service being the accounting officer for the executive writ large. Is that right?
Yes, I think, look, I'm not a constitutional expert, so maybe somebody who's coming to this committee or somebody who's watching this might correct me, but my reading of the situation is that the way our system works, because of the high degree of independence of departments, it is right that permanent secretaries are accounting officers for their department and are therefore accountable to their minister and to the Assembly. If you were to change that situation without wider executive change and structural reform, if you were to have the head of the civil service as the principal accounting officer, who is accountable to the First and Deputy First Minister, you're effectively giving FM and DFM a veto over the direction of resources within departments, and that's not how our system of government works. So that's where I'm saying I think you would need to look at wider constitutional reform if you wanted to change the role of Hawks. There is a reason why the role is maybe unique. It is because of our system. So yeah.
Indeed. Okay. And then moving on, one of the questions you particularly touch on is, and I'm pleased to say it because it's something I've talked a bit about, is recruitment and the graduate trainee thing. Declaring interest, I launched a whole policy paper on this a few years ago called the Make Change Programme, the idea of getting people in, not just graduates actually, but I think school leavers and then people who are mid-career as well. But you specifically focus on the graduate path, but draw a bit of a comparison with the fast track across the water, which is more resourced, more focused, and therefore slightly more of a kind of prestigious and effective recruitment tool. I understand they have restarted the graduate, so for a while it was frozen basically, the kind of fast track, you get promoted fast to sort of middle management. That's restarted, but from my understanding, it's restarted but in a fairly low level or sporadic way. Can you give us a bit more detail on that?
Yeah, I think it has restarted, although I think I could be wrong on this, but I think the last intake was maybe 2 years ago, but don't quote me on that. It was a couple of years ago anyway. Actually, as far, again, from my understanding, it was actually really competitive whenever it was opened up. There was something like, there were thousands of like, I think 2,000-3,000 applications or something for 30 or 40 posts, something like that. I think we have to remember that we have a really highly skilled workforce here. We've 2 top quality universities, and I think there's a lot of people coming out of those universities who would jump at the chance to get into public service and get into that sort of middle rung at the SO grade. And I think, we have obviously graduate programs, places like PwC and some of those big companies. I actually don't think there's a reason with a little bit of extra resource, with a little bit more focus, in my view, on the graduate management program, that we could actually create a highly competitive graduate program to compete with some of those bigger. We might not be able to compete in terms of volume, but certainly in terms of quality. And I think that's the important thing. It's not just about getting more people in and having the program on a more regular basis, although that's part of it. It's also about actually having a proper structured program. I think there is a bit of a feeling that there is a little bit of training, but it maybe isn't. They come and they hear guest speakers and a perm sec and that kind of thing, and obviously that's really good. But actually, I think there's more. If you look at the fast stream, they do the base camp, they have proper structured training. I think the challenge obviously is as we move into the job families and the workforce planning, so we're the move away from the big general service, there is a question around how that graduate management program will interact with the move to more people moving into those job families.
So quite a generalist thing to get it. Fast streams tend to be quite generalist recruitment, even if people specialise later.
I'm not an expert on the fast stream in the UK. As I understand it, they have moved to more sort of profession based. I'm not sure if maybe in the first year it's general, but I think it is more professions based now. So, and again, those are some open questions about how the graduate management program might work in the future. Do we bring people in general service maybe for a year and then they decide which kind of pathway they want to go down? So I think we also have to, and the conversations I've had with management side, I do recognise that because of this change, there is a little bit of flux happening on that. So maybe that's one of the reasons why there hasn't been an intake.
Change meaning the job family change.
Yes, because they're kind of working out then if everyone's going to be moving into these sort of job families and no longer the large general service, how does the graduate management program interact with that? Okay. But again, part of my challenge to them, and I think they know this, is going, well that's fine, but have we actually got people working on that and genuinely, rather than me just raising it and people saying that's the challenge, have we got people actually trying to work through that challenge? And I'd be really keen to work in partnership with them to try and deliver this, because as I say, we know the median age of the SES is 53. We want to get that median age down. Anecdotally, in fact, some of our reps who got to SES at a much younger age and came through a sort of fast stream. So I think you probably would see, with a bit more investment and more people coming through the graduate management program, that I think there is a high probability you would see that median age of SES come down.
And that surely is what I think we'll want to follow up on that. One final one for me before I bring in colleagues is, you mentioned the multi-year budget and that damaging workforce planning. We obviously don't have one at the minute, and we're in a can you say 2 things? One, about the position that puts civil servants in at the minute, because they're operating in an unusual, shall we say, or an irregular situation, and that will become more irregular and more legally problematic for them. Yep. It would be helpful for you to say something about that and what advice or guidance the FDA is either giving its members or what it's hearing from its members, but then also any reflections on the absence of a multi-year budget and what that means for workforce planning in the civil service.
Yeah, I think, it's not just workforce planning. I think it's transformation in general. And I know that you were talking to Paul about Integrate and some of the challenges there. I don't know if I think they said it was amber with sometimes flashing red was their response to the sort of risks factor. I don't know if the red was because of the budget, but I would imagine that's a big cause for concern. So it's not just the workforce planning, it's other bits as well. But look, as we said in the paper, the lack of agreement on a budget is the antithesis of driving forward transformation, and that's absence of a budget, but also then on top of that getting multi-year budgets that genuinely allow for proper planning. Again, not just workforce planning, we're also talking about the likes of big infrastructure projects as well, allowing that forward thinking and not this constant, because I do think one of the challenges that we have is that we're in a constant reactive zone.
Yeah.
And what we want to do is try and get on top of issues so that we can then be proactive. I've forgotten the first bit of your question. Sorry.
Well, the first bit of my question was around frankly, the legal peril
yes,
and the
yes.
issues for your members.
That's right. Sorry, yeah.
And because you will have permanent secretaries among your members, but also senior officials generally, and they're going to be the ones who have to. They're going to be the ones who have to tell ministers no, or tell ministers, I require a direction from you to spend that money because I'm not legally confident that I have legal cover as a public official who is bound by managing public money to spend this money, Minister.
Yeah, I think that is a real concern. I don't know if anyone in the committee saw it, but the press release from the NI Fiscal Council yesterday, actually the second paragraph, which I thought was quite interesting. I'm not sure if I was quite surprised to see it, although quite glad to see it because somebody else is talking about it other than just me and maybe other people. But anyway, I think there is a real concern. It's not, it's not for me to give guidance, I think. It's for the Minister for Finance and I suppose ultimately the First and Deputy First Minister but I suppose specifically the Finance Minister to give that guidance. But there is, and obviously as we know, there's a lot of permanent secretaries who are new into post as well. And, that relationship between a permanent secretary and a minister is so important. That is what unlocks getting those priorities done and getting delivery and having, ultimately perm secs are in a position where they do have to challenge a minister.
Yeah.
But actually, generally speaking, I think it's about respectful challenge and they understand that is how it's supposed to work. But so I am a little bit concerned about the position that we're going to be in. As I say, I don't think it's for me to give guidance. Yeah. But certainly it's on our radar and we are engaging with members and I think we will engage with the Finance Minister about it.
What would you presumably becomes harder given the division, given what we talked about earlier on, which is that effectively each department is its own little empire because constitutionally that's the way we've set it up. For ministers that makes it slightly more trickier for the civil service just to say no to a minister who's saying I want to spend on this thing. Yeah. Kind of as it were. Yeah. Go ahead, crack on, we'll do it. Whenever it's the person who's in charge is the permanent secretary and indeed other senior officials, they're getting less direction from the centre because that's the way our system works.
Yes, exactly. I'm not sure I could put it any better, but that's the fundamental tension. And ultimately, I think it was Andrew McCormick, I think, had said, there is a high bar for permanent secretaries to refuse ministers, and that's how it should be in the sense that it's ministers who are elected, it's ministers who should be driving forward. But as you say, at the same time, rightly so, permanent secretaries and accounting officers, they have obligations, they have fiduciary duties under managing public money NI, and I think it is for ministers to be aware of accounting officers' obligations. And I suppose my plea to ministers, although maybe it'll fall on deaf ears, is work with your accounting officer, work with your permanent secretary, try to get through and try to understand where they're coming from. And yes, if it comes down to ministerial direction and it requires executive approval, but that's not a situation any of us want to be in. And I suppose fundamentally before all of that is let's try and get a budget agreed and to save this.
Okay, moving on to colleagues now. Deputy Chair first.
Thank you, and thanks very much for coming in here, Robert. And you've expressed a lot of ideas and things for review and Stormont, but I'm just keen to hear more about the people that you represent. We had representation last week from NIPSA, and it was just very much focused on the sort of issues that are being raised by the staff, the concerns, the structures, and what's actually happening within that. So I'm just keen to hear that from those that you represent at that more senior civil service level, and specifically feedback that I would get would be around, and I'd just be keen to get your take on it, the fact that there is a senior civil service and then there's a mainstream civil service, and you're obviously representing that senior civil service. Do you think there's a clear and fluid link, or do you think is there a them and us culture?
So, and just to say, we also do represent grade 7s and 6s in the civil service as well. So, I don't get look. Undoubtedly, there will be some people who will look at it that way, but I don't get a sense that is across the board. Look, of course, senior civil servants do carry high level of responsibility, and of course, it's right that that they are trying to work to deliver on ministers' priorities and statutory obligations, as I say, in very difficult circumstances, in a highly politicised environment, in a four-party mandatory coalition. So I don't think you can necessarily separate the political environment from some of these questions. So, maybe sometimes there's no doubt, and I've been clear, there are absolutely workload pressures.
No, I'm talking more about, so very much the detail of a lot of the things we've been looking at are around absence, sick leave, work-related stress, bullying claims, like different things in different parts of the civil service, and very much those at the front line of delivering those public services. And we heard a lot of that coming through last week. So I'm just trying to just understand, do you think that there is a fluidity between the senior civil service and sort of the mainstream of it? And I appreciate you're saying grade 6 and grade 7, but grade 6 and grade 7s are still getting paid on 60,000 plus there as well. So there's a lot of people in those bands, but I'm just trying to get to the core of some of those issues, because that's what we're trying to look at in terms of our inquiry, because we're looking at the finances of it, and it came out very much last week about there are numbers, there are costs attributed to your sick leave in the civil service, but whenever you get into it, there's procedural elements, things contracted out to outside bodies, and to try to actually bring that in to understand what it means. I'm just trying to tease out the relationship between senior civil service and everyone else.
Yeah, I suppose I'm curious to understand what you mean by fluidity. I mean, do you mean in terms of are we talking about the interactions between senior civil servants and other civil servants below SCS? Is that the kind of...
Yeah, so we've been trying to, we've been teasing out a few things about where a lot of things like if you have a lot of sick leave, is it correlating with bullying claims, or people working outside of the office, or a particular type of work, or a lot of vacancies or temporary promotions, and whenever that is the case, so it kind of came out again last week, and we have had it. We've got shared service HR functions within the civil service, and is the default to go to the shared service system rather than to go to your manager? Is the senior service, civil service, accessible as line management in terms of that? Is that culture? I'm just trying to tease out.
Yes, I think I understand you better now. Thanks, Darren. Sorry, I was trying to tease out what. No, it's fine. I think part of it is the policies, right? And I think you heard from our trade union colleagues last week about some of the challenges with HR Connect and that service, and we would share that. I don't think there's anyone doubting. That's why Integrate is happening, and that's why those services are going to be bought back in-house. How those things are dealt with, I think, is more of an issue around the policies that have existed and as you say, the processes. That is all changing. Do I think in the past, perhaps, if you go back, there was probably a sense of them and us, SCS and just ordinary civil servants, for want of a better word. I think that is breaking down. I think obviously more needs to be done to do that. I don't think there has been some criticism in the past of a focus on, this sort of outsized focus on grade, right? So you're that grade and you're that grade, and that means, and I can't speak to you and all the rest of it. I get a strong sense from our members that there is a broad recognition that, of course, you have to respect hierarchies that exist, right? You have to respect hierarchies, and you have to respect people's where people are, and you don't want to necessarily go over the top with people. But actually, there is a real genuine want to deliver, and so it is about finding the people who are going to unlock and help you deliver that. So I think they're probably, again, you're talking about a lot of people. I can't obviously account for every single one of them, but I think there is a broad acceptance, and there is a cultural shift away from that I'm SES and therefore I only engage with ex cadre, that actually if we want to deliver, we have to engage with the best people. And I will also say that I think the workforce planning will absolutely help with that as well. I think that might shift the focus away from talking about specific grades. Obviously, grades are still very important, and matching grades with job responsibilities. But I think because we'll have a better understanding of the skills that and I think this is one of the things that I think you'll agree with, and I certainly agree with in terms of the Audit Office, is one of the challenges at the minute is there isn't a really good assessment of skills within the civil service because of the way it's structured. That is changing, that is moving forward. I think with the workforce planning and with Integrate and all the policy renewal programme, all of this stuff together, the people, process, data, technology, I think we will see a shift away from, that sort of a continued shift away from dealing with people just because they're a certain grade to dealing with the right person because they have the right skills.
And just another one, I had raised it in a previous session with the Department of Finance HR officials. Whenever you're coming to those more senior civil service positions, like you referenced the Audit Office, like capacity and capability, some sort of missing skill sets, especially at those senior levels, has been a challenge. But I have concerns about whenever you're going out for general civil service recruitments for posts at those very, very high salaries. And we'd asked questions, and it came through in our pack this week from the head of civil service that sent through. There's 71 current civil servants earning over £100,000, and yet we have significant gaps in senior roles. It was the adverts around the deputy secretaries that are going out, and I was making the point that not everybody's in the job market are looking for a job, but there are really, really good people that are sitting in certain industries that if a job was named in terms of an engineering post for infrastructure, a finance post for a finance person, it could entice them to think, I want to work in the public sector and take on that role and that six-figure salary, and really address some of the gaps that there are. But they keep advertising them under titles of deputy secretaries that wouldn't catch the attention of someone who isn't sitting looking for, wouldn't understand a civil service trawl. Do you think, and I'm not against internal promotions in any way, but I'm saying where you have those really specific roles, like a really senior engineering or veterinary or finance role, do you think that there should be a bit more carving out of specific roles? I mean,
I think if you've got a role, so I think maybe one of the challenges at a grade 3 deputy secretary role, the idea there, and I'm not sure that this is different, if you look at other civil services, is that, because that is such a high leadership role, the idea is that you do need to you maybe don't need to have every single skill set in terms of for the team below you, but you need to have that strategic leadership and vision. So, but certainly I don't disagree with, so maybe it's a question of the right grade. I'm not sure. I'm not saying definitely not, but I'm not sure that, especially under the current structure that we have, and even if we were to move, with the strategic workforce planning, because the deputy secretary role is that leadership role, I think you do need to have that strategic vision. Now, if it was turn around and saying we want somebody with a specific skill set in finance, for example, or procurement, then I guess that is something that could be looked at. But again, you're not going to be in a grade 3 role and only be doing procurement. But I think underneath that, and again with the strategic workforce planning, I don't disagree with you about that it is maybe how we frame the roles, and again attracting more people in, because like even you're saying grade 3, but I mean even if we're looking at grade 7 and there's a grade, what does that mean to a lot of people who maybe aren't exposed? So I don't disagree with you.
That's the point that I'm making. It's the title more so, because I'm not saying that everybody needs to have only one skill set. I'm saying to come in at strategic leadership level from someone who maybe isn't that familiar with the civil service. They don't necessarily look at a job advert that says the word deputy secretary and understands what that means, in the same as a grade 7 or any of those things. So I think it's just attracting that and bringing that in.
And I think maybe it is that question of how you frame it rather than applying. As I say, I'm not sure at that level you are going to get. So the way in which, obviously, as I say, the rest of this, the civil service is moving in terms of you're going to have like policy professionals and procurement professionals and IT professionals and all that kind of stuff, moving away from the general service. I'm not sure if you got to deputy secretary level that you're going to have it very specific like that, because again, at that level, it is a strategic leadership piece, and you need to be sort of a person you don't need to know absolutely, so you don't need to be an expert in procurement, as long as you can work with your team and can make sure that procurement is being done, and you're listening to the procurement experts in your team. But I think that it's the presentation aspect of it, and I certainly am not wedded to the title Deputy Secretary. I guess the question is, how do you get around that? Because it is at that level, it will be a sort of more generalist kind of role, if that makes sense.
And just a final one from me in terms of being that representative, of the union for these particular people. What would be the main type of thing that people are coming to you with as concerns, as in they need representation from you about? If there's too many to say, it's just what would be.
I know there's guys sitting waiting to come in for the next session, but no, I think, look, to be honest with you, a lot of it is we do get sickness absence. So a lot of the issues I've been dealing with are around sickness absence, and a lot of that is work related stress, and obviously a lot of that is politically sensitive environments and a lot of pressure. So sickness absence. I mean, of course, like bullying, harassment, those things do come through as well. I would say the other frustration, and we get a lot of, is promotion. So people unhappy with maybe that they haven't been successful in a promotion, or concerns around a particular, like TP. So again, and I know it's a concern for the committee. We've consistently raised it. The reliance on temporary promotion. And look, there's always going to be a level of temporary promotions, but there is an over reliance on it, and I think it does feed discontent within teams as well. So I would say it is a mixture. It depends from one day to the next, but it is a bit of everything.
I appreciate that. Thank you, Robert. Thank
Okay,
you, Chair.
Brian Kingston.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Robert, for your attendance and your paper. I mean, we would see the people you represent as key people, for this process. So, very keen just to hear their thoughts and their recommendations. And I've been looking through your main points, and we would see this as a collaborative effort. I'm not surprised. I'm not saying you're throwing it back at us, but the structure of government is a factor.
Yes.
In the silo working, at times we think there is a lack of agility, cross-departmental working, because we have a mandatory coalition, and the parties around the executive and the opposition, as well as trying to work for overall good of the country, we're also trying to find fault with each other, and so that doesn't help compared to a system where you have one party of government. But the main point I want to make, it's not about blaming the civil service, because there's as much blame, and us as politicians will be criticised as much by the public. But it is about, we feel your people are at that level to look up and to look down, so to speak, and see where improvement can be made. So that's why, I mean, if there are things that yet come to mind, we would welcome, because we just think they have a key insight in how the system can be improved. So if I could just ask that question, first of all, are there key things? I know you've written paper there.
Yeah.
What would you highlight, though, apart from the structure of government here?
In terms of driving forward transformation?
Yes.
I think, so what we've highlighted, actually, can I come back on one thing you said, and then I'll come on to that? I just want to say that you're absolutely right in terms of that senior officials are key to this, and of course there is going to be criticism, and I think there is what I called out in my opening statement is that I think there is a difference between accountability and criticism that is unconstructive, and I do think we do have to remember that, okay, they can sit around the tables like this and answer your questions, but officials can't reply publicly. And I do think unfortunately we have seen instances where officials are often caught in the crossfire between different political perspectives. I think there maybe sometimes is a lack of understanding of the role of officials when they come to committees, that they're not there to be a spokesperson for their minister. They're there to answer questions about a policy issue. And so I think accountability is absolutely important. I think sometimes we stretch the bounds of what accountability actually means, and we do stretch into invective at times, I'll be honest. But to come back to in terms of then looking forward and the key to transformation. So the structure of government, I suppose I wasn't saying structure of government is key to transformation. I suppose what I was trying to do is say that the structure of government is actually, that's part of the reality, and so transformation has to reflect that reality rather than what I don't want to happen. Because again, I want to engage constructively with the committee, is that we get recommendations that actually run up against our constitutional framework and can't go anywhere. Because really what we want to do is drive forward substantive transformation. So in my mind, there are a couple of things that I talked about. The graduate management programme, I think, is a useful one. We know a pipeline into future leaders is a risk. Deloitte did a State of the State report of 30 senior public sector leaders who had denied promotions because of the responsibilities that it just wasn't worth it. And I think that's a serious concern when people are going, I don't want to go up there because of some of the challenges when you interact officials with the politics can be daunting for a lot of people. And also, frankly, senior civil servants and civil servants in general, but senior civil servants here take on an extra layer of responsibility than senior civil servants elsewhere when our executive is collapsed. And, you know, there are the sort of last line of defence of ensuring our public services are delivered. So I think the graduate management programme is one of the areas. The workforce planning, the job families, I think is really important. That will allow us to be clear about what skill sets we have, what skill sets we don't have, and what skill sets we will need for the future. And then also allow for more streamlined recruitment. We know recruitment is a significant challenge. So I think the workforce planning will open that up. Integrate is obviously a massive part of it as well. I know if, Jerry's here, and I know if Steve Aiken was here, I'd probably be asked about Integrate and some level of concern about that. But that is, we can only go on the information that we've got, and that is a positive development. The other thing, as I said in my opening speech, was digitalisation and AI. So we know that the civil service has low digital maturity. I think that's a concern, frankly. I think something that needs to be tackled. It's not going to change overnight, but I think there does need to be approach. We had a conversation with the Chief Scientific and Technology Officer early in the new year about the vision for AI and some really, really good stuff. My concern is that when that gets put forward and goes into departments, that we might see some of the issues around who's responsible for this. Is it going to be P&OD and HR? Is it departments? And ultimately, what I hope we don't get to that position, because the guardrails for AI is really important. But I think looking at a sort of more strategic focus on digitalisation and AI is really important. And I think there is a real opportunity there. And as I say, we've done, our report we did with the Fabian Society. Now, this was based in UK and of UK civil servants, so that the actual survey itself doesn't apply here, but I think the principles absolutely apply, which is the need for strategic vision when it comes to the deployment of AI and digital tools. One of the things I was talking with my colleague before we came here is about having like a deposit of tools that different departments can then apply for a license that they will be able to use, and make sure that there is that learning so that we can create, because AI can unlock efficiencies. But it's doing it in the right way, and obviously there is massive concerns around bias and around the data that's being used and the algorithms and all that kind of stuff. Absolutely right. So it has to be done carefully as well, and that's why those guardrails are really important. So I think there's the workforce planning piece, the graduate management programme, digitalisation and AI, and of course making sure that our terms and conditions in the civil service continue to be competitive and we can attract good people into the service from the private sector as well, partly. Not just private sector, but...
One other question. Fairly briefly, I just want to ask you about the silo working. And as I say, our structure of government, I think, reinforces that.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you're aware, in terms of civil service elsewhere, do most civil service servants tend to stay in one department? How easy is it to move between departments? And what are the pros and cons of that? I mean, maybe that gives a specialism that people are staying within a department and getting a good knowledge, but also does it restrict the ability to move? And whereas people move around, they can get a more varied experience and bring skills and maybe be part of. Agility, I think, is an important thing, where you bring people together for shorter term projects rather than just having somebody in one role and I can only, you almost like I'll only do one role and I have to stay in that role. You know, if people can be brought together for short-term, as would happen in the private sector, just that agility. So just into new views on that.
Yeah, look, as I say, I mean, Matthew, obviously, being in the UK civil service, might know better than I do. But I think, obviously, the UK civil service is structured very differently. Pay is different in different departments. There's probably a bit more of an internal competition within the civil service in the UK, because there are certain departments who pay, you know, a similar grade but pay better than others, and there is that, and obviously it's a much bigger beast in terms of that mobility. But I think internal mobility is absolutely critical, making sure that people don't get stuck in, and I know it's a concern, one of the concerns raised around the strategic workforce planning and you know, people being brought into these sort of job families, that it might reinforce some of the silo working, and certainly that's something that is a concern. But I actually think, you know, from the conversations we're having with management side, actually it should break through that, because it'll be much clearer about the skills that are required in order to move. So if you want to move, if you're in an operational delivery role and you want to move into a policy role, you'll have a much greater idea when we have the job families as to what you need to do in order to move into that role. So I think there is a concern about it, but actually I think the workforce planning will absolutely help with that. And I think it's interesting, Brian, around what you're saying around special projects and getting people to work or even step up, because one of the challenges that we know is the over-reliance on temporary promotions. So on one hand, you know, we're saying we want to reduce the amount of temporary promotions, but if we go down the route of having people maybe acting up for a specific project, we might actually see, and I'm not saying it's wrong, but there is a concern around then that are we going to see the temporary promotions, you know, on an upward trajectory? And maybe the answer it shouldn't be a downward or upward trajectory, it should be what is required, and maybe that's fair enough. But I just think maybe one of the unintended consequences of maybe doing that is one of the other issues that we know is there, which is the amount of TPs. And one of the areas that I think is something we need to look at is TPs on special projects. So if somebody's on maternity leave or on sickness, there's not really much you can do about that. It's the special projects that I think we need to be maybe a little bit more, and as I understand it, this is going to happen. I think we probably need to probe a little bit more about what is the special project, how long is it going to last for, because again, as I said, the TP issue does create does create tension sometimes within teams, and that's not good either. But in terms of agility, absolutely, and the internal mobility is absolutely key. Actually, because of the size of our civil service, we probably couldn't function if we didn't have proper, you know, internal mobility. We require people to move and to, you know, upskill themselves in different areas, and I think the workforce planning will help with that.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Jerry Carroll. Jerry?
Oh, I can't hear you.
You're on mute there, Jerry.
Yeah, there we go.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Robert, for your presentation. Thanks for opening comments as well. I think it's really important that you said that, and commend you for it. You can't imagine in passing about sort of diversity in the workplace and the importance of that. And there's quite a lot of commentary in a general sense about, you know, civil service being too woke. I mean, take your day of the week, and they're being kind of criticised for either going on parade or let people go to parade or whatever sort of diversity programs that they have. I mean, in terms of the FDA, because I'm presuming it's kind of your members maybe facilitating some of these diversity programs or groups, would the FDA have any concern about that kind of language and focus on minority communities in the civil service?
Yeah, I mean, look, we have an absolute, like, it's a core value of us as a union is respect for equality, diversity, and inclusion. I think it's not just about the right thing to do, although that I think that is part of it. It's also we know that actually more diverse workplaces have better outcomes as well, and we want to see the civil service reflect the society that we serve. And as I say, I spoke to one of our members who was seriously affected by what happened last week. This is a civil servant who has given decades of service, who's raised their kids here, and has. Yeah, you know, has, as I say, as a public servant and has worked with the civil service, with ministers to try and deliver better public services. And yet the scenes last week, made them feel like all of that wasn't worth anything. So I do think it underlines why diversity and inclusion, not just policies, but initiatives are really important as well. So as I said, it's not just about free from discrimination. That's part of it. But it's not a negative thing. It's not free from discrimination. The workplace should be absolutely proactive in creating inclusive workplaces, so that when people come into the workplace, they feel that they are able to get on and deliver. And we do, in the FDA, we have a number of initiatives. We do ethnic minorities into leadership, women into leadership, which are all programs around connecting civil servants from sort of minority backgrounds and women, etc., to come together to learn, so that they can develop in their careers as well. So it's a value that I think is important for us as a union, and important for the civil service. And as I say, we welcome that the head of the civil service underlined that commitment last week in her message to officials.
Yeah, thanks, Robert. And I think that's really important, those kind of programs. And I think there's a narrative being put out there that those programs are, a waste of time and they're kind of wasting money, which I wouldn't share that analysis, obviously. But would you get that kind of concern from FDA members? You're concerned, if you will, about the kind of some of the narrative about these kind of diversity programs. Would that be something that you would kind of hear as an organisation?
I can't honestly say that I've had a specific conversation with a member about some of that. Look, to be honest, Jerry, I think sometimes civil servants are just expect some of the criticism in the public, and so sometimes they don't even raise it with me, because it's almost, unfortunately, it's just seen as part of the as part of it, which is really unfortunate. And obviously, I'm doing my best to try and counter some of the narratives out there that are, I think, unfairly critical of the civil service. But it's not something, I haven't had a specific conversation with a member around discussions around sort of diversity and EDI sort of initiatives, but I think that's because they're, those staff networks, those initiatives are ongoing, and I think it is about creating an inclusive workplace. I think it is about the kind of, when you come into work, we have to understand people, for example, again, if you were from an ethnic minority background and you were going into work last Wednesday or Thursday, your experience was very different from somebody who was, who was white. You weren't maybe as fearful about the impact that the riots, etc., had. So I do think we have to understand that this does have an impact in the workplace, and that's why proactive initiatives are important to make sure, as I say, the workplace isn't just free from discrimination, but actually is proactively encouraging diversity and inclusion.
Yeah, I appreciate that, and I find those kind of issues come through, I'd be keen on finding out about them. I'm sure the committee would as well. Just a different question, Robert. I think you mentioned about the civil service being, or could be, or should be an attractive employer. Mm-hmm. Would you say it is an attractive employer for people?
I think it is. I think one of the issues is that there isn't a huge amount of routes into the civil service. So again, part of why I think the graduate management program is really important is because if you're a graduate and you're looking at, let's say you've come out of university, dare I say it, with a politics degree, and you're looking for a job, and a lot of those people would be motivated by public service, but there isn't really a route into the civil service, because again, the graduate management program, I don't think, has met its full potential. So I think, and of course there are issues as well then with certain professions where they aren't as competitive as they would be in the private sector as well. So again, that's where I think there are definitely issues around competitiveness in the civil service. But I think overall, there are still really positive aspects of the civil service, and that ability to be involved in public service and to deliver for people in Northern Ireland. But undoubtedly, there are challenges, and again, coming back to the instability point and the fact that, I think, as I say, sometimes officials are on the receiving end of really unconstructive criticism. I don't think, especially if you're at a senior position, I mentioned the Deloitte report. 30 senior public sector professionals said that they didn't want to take on added responsibility because of the environment. That is a real challenge. So I don't think it's as blunt of an instrument to say it is attractive or it isn't. Can we do better? Absolutely. But I also do think it is an attractive proposition as well.
Yeah, thank you. Just two final quick questions, if that's okay. There's been a lot of focus on sort of sick days in the civil service. I mean, it's obviously part of this inquiry, and we've had a few discussions about it on the committee. And in a general sense, I think it's quite often used to kind of kick civil servants to say, you take more sick days than people in the private sector, and kind of almost like cracking the whip. I mean, you talked about the pressure on sort of your members, and obviously the stress and that. I mean, that's kind of my understanding of why there's sort of perceived or why it's presented as higher sick levels within the civil service. Is there anything else you want to expand upon in terms of that?
No,
that area.
Look, I suppose we all want to see people in work. We want to see people, getting fulfilled in terms of their working lives. We don't want to see people going off on sick, but they do, and they go off on sick, as you say. I think it was the audit office report that mentioned work-related stress, and I think there's a little bit of more work ongoing as to understand some of the reasons, more in-depth reasons behind sickness absence. But also, and I know it was mentioned last week, around up until recently we had issues around OHS and we couldn't get enough people in, and obviously that creates delays. We know, unfortunately, our waiting lists across the board are higher, and so that creates issues in terms of people getting ready to go back in. If you have to wait for weeks for a GP appointment or to see a consultant or whatever, it does create you will be off longer maybe than counterparts elsewhere. So again, there are issues beyond the control of the civil service that I think impact sickness absence levels in the civil service. But there is a new policy, again, I think it was mentioned last week, around supporting attendance, and there's some positive aspects of that. Of course, there's some issues that we may not see eye to eye, but we're working through that policy, and hopefully, again, ultimately the goal is that we try to, that we ensure people are fulfilled and people don't go off sick. But ultimately, we also need a service that is there for people when they are sick, and that they're not punished even further for going off sick.
Yeah, it's kind of one. Just I get a lot of correspondence, I'm sure members do as well, about the slowness of recruitment. Usually, it's around sort of AO sort of level in the civil service. Would that be something that you would kind of experience? Your members would be raising within the FDA?
I think we would say it more in terms of, from members, the slowness of recruitment, not necessarily at the SCS level, because it's not those sort of large volume competitions at that level. But they would certainly raise concerns around how long, and talking to PermSec members, for example, it is a frustration for them because they're sitting with the vacancies, but they're waiting for the likes of HR Connect to go through and to do these large volume competitions. So they wouldn't be as concerned necessarily in terms of their recruitment, but the impact that the slowness of recruitment has for their teams and within their departments. So I think, again, I think everybody has agreed recruitment has been too slow, but Integrate and some of the changes that are happening, I think, are positive, and the workforce planning piece will hopefully help to streamline some of that recruitment, so that it'll be more targeted rather than these large volume general service competitions.
Okay, Joe. I need to bring
Gemma,
because Gemma has to go soon. Gemma, Dolan.
Yeah, thank you very much, Chair, and thank you, Robert. I only have one question. So you've highlighted the importance of the multi-year budgets for strategic planning. So given that our budget is obviously heavily influenced by the British government, what impact has austerity and the prioritisation of military spending had on our civil service morale and the ability to deliver?
I don't know if I can answer that question. Fair enough. You may as well try. I'm not sure that I can. That might be your perspective on it. Look, there's no doubt that the lack of, in this case, the lack of a budget is a significant issue, and as highlighted, and the Fiscal Council highlighted, I have a real concern about the impact that's going to have on our accounting officer members who are going to have difficult conversations with ministers. And again, I completely understand ministers are under pressure to deliver as well. The public want delivery, but they have obligations under managing public money that they can't ignore either. So we are heading into, I think, what's going to be, I hope we can get through it, and I think hopefully. And my message again to ministers would be to understand that accounting officers have obligations as well, and to try and work with accounting officers to get through any challenges that exist. But there's no doubt it is going to be a challenging time. And then beyond that, so that's even just in the now and the reactive piece. And as I say, in the proactive piece and the ability to deliver when it comes to the long-term planning, whether it's workforce planning, whether it's the large budget or large infrastructure projects and things like that, that we want to see proactiveness on. And even on the likes of Integrate, as I say, I don't know if the flashing red on Integrate was because of the budget. I don't know, but I would imagine that is a risk. So even something like that, where I think that is a perfect example of where lack of agreement on a budget and even lack of a multi-year budget is undermining our ability to do genuine transformation. So hopefully I've avoided the political aspect of your question there.
Thank you, Chair. Thank
well
you,
handled.
Robert.
No one else has indicated that they wish to ask a question. So on that note, Robert, thank you for covering such a wide range of areas. It's been really useful for the purposes of our inquiry. If there's anything else we need to ask, I'm sure we'll be able to do it by written evidence, but I've certainly found that really beneficial. I'm sure others have. Thank you.
Okay.
So, members, we're now going to go on and talk about, following on from that, discussion about the budget. We will go on to talk to the Department of Finance around the level of need analysis, and members are agreed. I assume that Hansard will record this and report it. So there are papers are in the tabled pack. There's a whole range of things. There's at page 35, probably most importantly, a pack from the department, which includes a number of important things around. Well, it's quite a short paper, but it's useful because it sets out tables of relative funding versus need in Northern Ireland and the other devolved jurisdictions. There is also the hi Tony. There is also the fiscal in that document. Also, the Fiscal Council's estimate of NI need, which goes back to 23. The interim fiscal frameworks is page 73. The Holtham Commission report on the Welsh funding settlement, which goes way back to 2010. There's various other things. I won't go through them all now, but not in the pack, but still very relevant, is the document the Fiscal Council published yesterday, which is one of their fiscal sustainability reports and touches on broader need-related issues and the budget management position in the absence of a budget, but also both the open book review and the funding position and the executive's position or the finance minister's position about where we are relative to our need funding versus, and how that compares to Scotland and Wales. So if you haven't already, and I'm sure members certainly should have it, it's been shared with you, and you should be aware of it, the Fiscal Council report from yesterday. So welcome to the meeting. Frequent flyers with us, but you're welcome again. Tony Simpson, who's Deputy Secretary for Strategic Policy and Reform, Aidan McMahon, who's Director of Fiscal Policy, Fiscal Policy Division, and Eamon Graham, who's an economist in the Fiscal Policy Division. You're all very welcome. Tony, if you'd give us an opening statement, please.
Okay.
And members indicate if you want to ask a question.
Okay, thank you, Chair, for the opportunity to brief the committee on Northern Ireland's relative need and funding position. The briefing paper we submitted provides the committee with the calculations which underpin the comparisons of relative need and funding across the DAs. And with your agreement, Chair, I'll provide a brief overview of this work, and then we're happy to take any questions that members may have. In calculating how Northern Ireland's relative need and funding compared to Wales and Scotland, we start by establishing what relative needs are across the nations. The committee will be aware that Northern Ireland's level of need, as currently recognised by the UK government, is 124% of that in England on a per capita basis. This is as agreed in the interfiscal framework from May 24 and is based on the 2023 report from the Independent Fiscal Council originally. That is, of course, notwithstanding further discussions to be had with Treasury about the application of Professor Holsom's 2025 report, which suggested that our level of need should be 128% with agriculture included. In terms of relative need...
It would be still be, if agriculture wasn't included, which obviously isn't included now, but the difference between the 124 and the 128 is more than just agriculture. Is that right? So even if agriculture, am I right in saying that, or is the difference entirely agriculture?
It's primarily agriculture.
Okay, go on ahead. Yeah.
In terms of the relative need estimates for Scotland and Wales, these have both been taken from the Independent Commission on Funding and Finance for Wales in 2010, known as the Hotham Commission. And while their work in 2010 was on Wales, it used the same methodology to produce an estimate of relative need for Scotland. And as you've seen from Table 1 in the paper that we provided to the committee, relative need differs substantively across the devolved regions. Northern Ireland, as we said, sits at 124, Scotland 105, Wales 115 of that in England. So it's clear that our need is significantly higher than the other devolved administrations. If we turn now to funding, Treasury provided relative funding per head figures for each of the devolved administrations at the autumn budget in 2025. And these are also presented in Table 1 of the paper. So simply put, by taking the relative funding figure minus the relative need figure, this provides a percentage point figure for each of the DAs for how above need they are funded at that point in time, which shows that Wales is funded on average some 8 percentage points above need over this CSR period, whereas Scotland is funded on average some 20 percentage points over the SR. And we, in contrast, based on the figures provided at the autumn budget, are only funded slightly above the level of need over this SR period by less than a single percentage point. And as you referred earlier, Chair, to the report from the Fiscal Council, so that analysis, which was published yesterday, suggested that due to recently published population data, that we now actually may be funded slightly under our current level of need to the tune of some 170 million. And no doubt probably members might want to discuss that a little bit further. But in terms of the comparison that we've made, so to consider how much additional funding Northern Ireland would have received over the SR period had it been funded above need on a similar basis to Wales and Scotland. To do this, we estimated what 1 percentage point of need is worth in pounds terms. So by taking Northern Ireland's total spending, as reported by the Treasury at the autumn budget, which was 18.552 billion, and dividing it by our relative need factor of 124, this gives an estimate of a monetary value of 1 percentage point of need of 149 million per percentage points. So the conclusion of all this is this analysis suggests that we were funded in the same position, in the same way as Wales, we would get an additional £1 billion per annum, and if we were funded like Scotland, this could amount to an additional £3 billion per annum. So, and the Fiscal Council's report published yesterday, which they have undertaken their own separate and independent analysis on this, found similar results using a variety of different approaches. So this is an issue that the Finance Minister has been highlighting repeatedly as he continues to make the case to the government for a more equitable and sustainable funding model for public services here. So with that, Chair, happy to take questions from
Thank you very much. I'm sure there
members.
will be questions. Obviously, a very important subject. In many ways, it's the most important subject to the extent that it is clearly one of the issues which is preventing, or the executive or the minister says it is his reason or the executive's reason for not setting a budget or for not agreeing a budget. I think it's fair to say. So we need to understand that, and you're right to say, obviously, the paper yesterday, in effect, endorses at least that calculation or that comparison with Scotland and Wales and the need differential. I suppose just to ask a couple of questions, or to put a couple of positions to you. First of all, what does the UK, I presume you've already said this directly to the UK government in various ways, what do they say back when you point out the Scotland and Wales differentials?
Well, with regard to getting into back and forth between officials, we're obviously making the case. They have not been disputing those figures with us. Obviously, there's different ways of calculating it. I wouldn't want to presuppose what they are saying, but their position to us is, well, you are funded at need. You have an estimated relative need factor of 124, and you're funded at that, notwithstanding what the Fiscal Council have said. So that is a position that's being articulated to Treasury, and discussions are ongoing around what sustainable funding for us may be, but they have not been concluded yet.
I want to come on to that, where the negotiations are or are not, but their effective position is it's irrelevant. It's irrelevant. The precise amount that Scotland and Wales are funded above their levels of need is not relevant to our conversation. Is that what they say, or do they acknowledge and kind of endorse what you're saying and then just say yes, but? I'm trying to give this is really important to people because we don't have a budget, and the Minister says he's not agreeing a budget, or that we shouldn't agree a budget until the Treasury moves. And like in one sense, there's a logic to that, but there's also the very real risk, as we heard in our previous session, to public services and indeed the legal position for civil servants and all sorts of things. So we need to understand exactly where those discussions are.
Well, it's difficult for me to give a live commentary on ongoing discussions between ourselves and UKG. And I suppose our role here in my part of the department, so we're undertaking the technical work. Much of the discussions directly between the Minister and UKG and the NIO are being supported by colleagues in Public Spending Directorate. So I'm not personally in the room or involved in some of those discussions, so I can't comment on what the discussions are, and I think probably wouldn't be helpful, given the sensitivity of the discussions that are ongoing, to even comment on them if I was in a position to do so. But we are articulating the position very firmly.
Okay, so just to go back then on the position, essentially, Scott, so the numbers that are used are from 2010, as in Scotland and Wales numbers are from Holtham in 2010. Holtham produced a 105 for Scotland, being their relative level of need, and Wales is 121, I think.
115.
115.
We were 121 in the Holtham work, but that didn't account for increasing justice.
Okay, that's why that's popped into my head. So we're now at 124. What if? So the Fiscal Council report says yesterday that in previous years, Northern Ireland was kind of like much more way above its level of need. We've obviously come down. Are we now? So we obviously at one point came down to being, under our level of need, which was very frustrating and challenging. But do we know how many years we've been above need and how long it's taken us to come down to where we are, which is kind of just at it now?
I was going to say,
in 2019 it was about the Fiscal Council saying 2019 we were at about 150%. 140, yeah.
I suppose it depends on the settlement in a particular year. Back when Barnet was first settled in the late 1970s, there was a premium for Northern Ireland, as there was for Scotland and Wales, and that's been eroded over time through the Barnet squeeze. But in individual years, you'll have different times that you'll be funded at different levels. But we don't have a running figure of that because it's not something Treasury would regularly have published. It didn't have the level of importance it now has. And that came about particularly back in 2010 and then to 2016 with Wales, because they were feeling the pinch particularly back then. And it's now happened to us 10 years later. Scotland perhaps less so. So there isn't a run of numbers that shows that over time, our relative need position versus a relative funding position.
Is it because we had so many one-off pots that you get in year, because of a negotiation you get a pot to spend on something, and
that would have been an element to it, yes.
Automatically, fresh start or whatever, any number of ones
even if you look at Treasury's own figures in the open book assessment, you'll see years where, particularly recently, we have been underfunded in terms of the 124, and it has been the additional funding that we've got as part of political agreements that have taken us up and over the 124. So there were years where we were 121, but the additional money, for example, from the Hillsborough talks, will have brought our relative funding level above the 124, but that was required, and that's something the Finance Minister said, that we have ended up needing and being required to have those additional one-off packages to bring us over that level of need.
And so, that really kind of, I'm not necessarily asking you to endorse this statement, but I suppose one would say that it just reinforces this sort of cycle of dysfunctionality whenever, you kind of there has to be a political crisis in order to generate a funding package, but then the way the funding package happens, it doesn't really inculcate good practices or strategic planning, and then political dysfunction reinforces the budgetary problems, and the budgetary problems reinforce, etc., etc. That's a statement rather than a question, I suppose. But in relation to the calculations, is there any concern that the Wales and Scotland numbers are now quite old? They're from like 2010.
No, the Wales figure, for example, so that's used in their own in the current funding arrangements at this point in time. So Treasury continue to use that for Wales. Need is an issue that, just given the components of a need estimate, it moves gradually. It will move gradually over time. It's not something that's going to be volatile, so it wouldn't be a concern of ours that they're unreliable figures.
Okay, that's helpful. Okay, I'll bring in others now. Bring in Deputy Chair first.
Thanks, Chair, and thank you all very much for being here. And I know at Joanne's last session she sort of touched on some of the work you were doing, so it's really good to have you here to speak about it. The Chair had sort of touched on this already, but I just want to bring it up again. Whenever we're comparing the Northern Ireland, Scotland and Wales, in the table, the figures, the fact that they're the 2010 figures for them and then the much more recent for us, is there any consideration or thought from UK government as to potentially reviewing these on any particular cycle, or 2010 versus 2023, 24 is a big difference in a timeline?
There's been no discussion or indication from UKG that is something that they would look at. And this, I suppose, this piece of work was the Hotham work was done primarily to inform the Welsh fiscal framework, so it was done with a purpose. I suppose just to kind of illustrate the point that in terms of how relatively stable these figures are. So in the original Hotham work back in 2010, they estimated Northern Ireland's level of need to be 121 without policing and justice estimated. When Hotham did his work again for us just recently, that 121 figure, the comparable figure in his latest analysis, was 120. So that only moved by 1 percentage point over that 15-year period. And then obviously when we add the policing and justice need to it, that was brought it up to 124. So and I think just to kind of, I suppose, just to follow up, I think Treasury's position would be that the Barna formula is the mechanism to kind of allocate funding. So I don't see any appetite there to reopen that from them.
And maybe just on top of that, whenever the fiscal framework was signed for Wales in 2016, it was written in it that it didn't imagine that it would be looked at on a regular basis. So that was something that they assumed would be set for quite a significant period of time. There's no specific date or timing on that, but it's obviously something they didn't expect to go back and look at on an annual basis, for example.
Whenever you set that out in that table, in those simplistic terms, what does the UK government then say to you whenever you set that out in that way?
As Tony probably alluded to, one, probably not overly helpful to get into the sensitivities of it, but you wouldn't expect them to say, oh yeah, that makes total sense. So they will see it, they will digest it.
A disparity, with some of them that you would think they would look at it and say we must look at those 2010 figures again, or it's.
And obviously they might look at it from our perspective and think we have a particular motive, but it's really probably quite helpful then with the Fiscal Council coming up and reinforcing the figures that we have been using, the Finance Minister's been using for the last X number of months on this.
Yeah, no, and it's just disappointing whenever you do see figures set out that way and it looks like it's not a fair position to be in whenever you're looking at others, but I appreciate everyone's own government operates in a different way. In terms of whenever this was reviewed and they did get the uplift, there was the financial settlement that effectively wrote off like £559 million off overspend over the 2 years at the start of the spend review period. Whenever you actually you're looking at that there, it's not really an overspend. That's probably where it would have been if we had have put the level of need back those couple of years. Is that conversation closed, or it's £500 million there that I feel that if this had been applied, in its true and full form, giving us that level of need and looking back at those 2 years that we should have had here?
Well, certainly in the discussions at the time when the executive was restored, there was very clear arguments put forward on the Northern Ireland side that that should be baseline to anything, the extent to which we're below need. That wasn't the approach that was ultimately arrived at, but obviously these are all still very much live discussions now about what does fair and sustainable funding look like for Northern Ireland.
When it's good, and I'm pleased to hear that it is live, and I appreciate it, as you say, the sensitivities. You know, the minister's talking to the UK government, to Treasury, and there's only so much that you can say. But you know, here in Finance Committee, if there is anything through our work that we can do for in terms of engagement or highlighting things, or any exercises that we can do to support that, we would all be keen to do all of those things, because obviously the executive has a united voice on this. Everyone wants this looked at. You see the numbers set out. The case looks fairly simple that this should be getting looked at for us here, and it is a bit frustrating because we're in this current situation where we don't have a budget. We can't sign up to a budget in its current form without basically signing up to make catastrophic cuts here in this current year, and it's a terrible position to be in. So obviously the Labour government's in a difficult position over there at the minute. Do you feel that you have their attention?
I think it's useful to kind of your opening point around the focus on this, and it's really helpful. So it was a number of months ago that our team had conducted the work to arrive at the 1 billion and 3 billion estimates. So the fact that the council have looked at that, the fact that this committee is drawing attention to that, can only be helpful to us. Those discussions with UK government, with the Treasury, with the NIO were ongoing. So the fact that we're having discussions where colleagues on the public spending side are highlighting into the very severe pressures that departments are under, that the Treasury are aware of the financial position that executive departments are in.
Okay, no, thanks very much, and appreciate all the work that you're doing. If there is anything else through committee, I would be keen to support that. Thank you.
Brian Kingston.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Thanks for your paper and your attendance. It's first time, Table 1, it's the first time I've seen it set out like this, so I know the Minister's referred to it, so it certainly is helpful. So in terms of what is contained in Table 1, is this your own work then? Is this Department of Finance? And
this is
I know Diana's kind of asked this question, but what is Treasury's view of it? And my second question, again a bit of a repeat, but are they, I mean, the table says effectively the 3 devolved nations are getting quite similar amounts per head, per capita, whereas the level of need in Wales and Scotland is meant to be lower. It's just they haven't updated it for over 15 years. I
suppose in terms of the Treasury, so the first question, Brad, so yes, so this is internal. This was based originally on our own internal work. It is using figures that are Treasury figures, so it's spending figures, it's need figures, which have been done independently. So it's not our estimate of need or our estimate of what relative funding is. These are all using official Treasury estimates of spending, and so the figures can't, the components of the calculation can't be disputed. The fact that the council have looked at this now and independently arrived at a similar point is very helpful to us. In terms of the Treasury view of that, I think our view would be that these figures, particularly now with the council coming in independently looking at it, when you think of the status and the calibre of the people on the council, these are beyond dispute. So the question really for our colleagues in the UK government is what is the UK government response to this, when you can see very clearly that there's an unfairness or an inequity in terms of how the DAs are treated. So what previously the Secretary of State has said that Northern Ireland is funded at need, and that is correct, setting aside that's the recent the publication yesterday, which says we're slightly below need, but we are around 124. The bigger question is that level of funding sustainable? So maybe just to kind of explain a little bit, if it's helpful, what relative need means, or what relative need means. It means we need 24% more to deliver comparable services to those in England, but that does not pass a judgment on whether the quality of those services in England are at the level that citizens there would expect. Yeah. So there's obviously, in the public discourse in England, concerns about the quality and level of public services. So that does not mean because we were funded at need, then that things are fine, you have enough money to deliver public services. It's just on that estimate, that gives you that equitable position with England. But when you look at Scotland, Wales, they have that buffer in terms of significantly more above need, which perhaps helps them offset the constrained fiscal position or funding position that they're facing because of that historical funding premium that they've received.
But the actual level of need, this is not a process that they're getting into regular updates on? They're
No, because
they don't like maybe using this.
No, I wouldn't say that. It's more around. So some of the colleagues can kind of, I'm sure, will be able to list them off better than I will. But the components of the need calculation. There's 6 domains, but it includes things like your demographics or your age profile. How many young people, how many old people do you have? Levels of deprivation, levels of sickness. Levels of rurality. So those sorts of things don't change materially over time. So it's not something that you would need to update every year. The thing that we look at more readily is what's the funding position. So, and we're accepting that the methodology that Professor Hotham had developed is as good as you're going to get in terms of estimating what is how do the regions compare in terms of the relative need. So that it's not something the Treasurer's saying, we're not looking at need again, or we're not going to reopen that. It's really, there's a methodology now. The question for, as I said in response to Dan, is how do they respond to that? And then there's some wider discussions that we want to have in terms of some of the mechanics around how does the formula work when it's being applied to Barnet. So there's things like, as we've seen, we've dropped slightly below need on the council's latest work. So we've talked around, well, should there be a buffer zone? So you get 124 when you're 0.05, away from need. We think that buffer zone should be bigger. So there's some discussions we need to have with the Treasury as part of discussions on a wider fiscal framework once we get through this immediate funding pressure, which is where our main focus is in the department.
But in terms of their response to this, they haven't given any official response, basically, but are you saying it's just feeding into the ongoing negotiations?
Well, you probably wouldn't expect them, as I said before, to say, yes, we agree with your analysis and we need to do something about it. So, but they're absolutely aware of it. And as I say previously, now that the Fiscal Council have come out and reinforced that, that's actually quite helpful for our arguments with them. One point that they've made before, I think, whenever the First Minister had quoted some of these figures in the media, I think at Nolan Show it's referenced in the Fiscal Council report that Treasury had come out and say, well, Scotland doesn't have a level of need. But interestingly, in some of the documents, in terms of a formal agreed level of need that the UK government recognises. But in terms of some of the documents that they've produced, for example, the Open Book, or in the Spending Review last year, they talk about all the DEAs being funded above their calculated level of need. So obviously, within Treasury, they have some sort of perspective on that, and the only assessment that we have ever seen is from Hotham back in 2010.
Okay, thank you.
Judy Hardy.
Yeah, no, thanks very much, and thanks. I think the table is important, and it's something I suppose the Finance Minister and the Department and indeed the Executive have been saying for some time, and it is good to see the Fiscal Council have actually confirmed what we have been saying, because I think for too long the British Government and consecutive governments have been gaslighting the people here. Not only are we being treated as second-class citizens, but actually third and fourth class, because I see that you use Scotland and Wales, but when you look at the recent injection of money into the baseline in England in terms of local councils who would deliver a lot of the services that departments here, it is in the region of 5.6 billion and 6.34 billion of additional money that has went in as a baseline. So I'm just wondering what analysis is being done there, because we are being treated differently, and even the commentary here, that the Executive, it's the beg and bowls out again, that it's another bailout. In fact, it's the opposite when you start to look at this table compared to those other parts, England, Scotland and Wales. And I do think that Westminster is gaslighting us in terms of this. So I'm glad that it's out, and it's just really around your experience, or if the table could be included to look at that increased baseline budget for English councils, because again, that further, I think, strengthens our case that we have been making here. And it's just talking around where there has been money that they try and play, that it's increased spend to the Executive, that has been cash. So you talked about the importance of baseline and things within our budget. If you can just say a wee bit more about that as well.
Yeah, well, on the council point, it is, or on the councils in England, you're totally right in terms of the fact that they deliver different services. So it's been a point that we've been at pains to make in regular discussions, to say that when we respond to, say, some things like in the open book and so on, where they make these very stark comparisons between services delivered here and services delivered across the water, that you're not comparing like with like. And when you look at the pressures facing, services here, so some of the services the kids deliver through education, they're the very services that are delivered by local authorities in England, where they've had to have support because the councils have been the council have been in very difficult financial positions. So it is very clearly a part of it. We haven't got, unless colleagues correct me, any separate work looking at or any separate figures or estimates on what that might mean for Northern Ireland.
No, we haven't looked into. I mean, public spending colleagues will certainly have got, if there's been additional Barnett, for example, for increased SEND funding in England, there's a level then that Northern Ireland has got as a result of that. But public spending colleagues would be looking at to ensure we're getting the appropriate Barnett for that.
But as you say, a large part of that injection went in because it's not that their level of service is good. I mean, it's crumbling, which is why they've had to have a huge injection of cash then, of money, into their baseline going in. So even if they were comparing us to England, that's not even a good system to begin with in terms of public services and where they are.
Yeah, and it's certainly a position that the Minister has taken, and I know when he meets with his colleagues that, finance ministers across the DAs, are very strongly making the case there needs to be more sustainable funding for public services, and that the settlement from Westminster isn't providing that.
Yeah. And I suppose there's been a lot of talk recently in terms of increasing defence spending at Westminster, and some talks of decreasing social security spend and stuff. So it's just to see if you're picking anything up and what concern that would mean if they were to shift money out of, for example, social security here, what impact that would have to put into military spend.
Well, I suppose in terms of how Barnett works, so the comparability factor for defence is zero. I think if it's not zero, it's not far off it. So if there's additional spending going into defence, that would not have the way if it was going into health or education, we would get a Barnett uplift as a consequence of that. So if there's those sorts of decisions being made in London, then, and if it's skewing money towards defence, well then that will not provide a benefit and a significant uplift for us.
But if it's taking money from social
and if it's
security,
coming, and if that'll be under Amy, but then that will still, if there's changes to the social security system, and then subsequent to any decisions that we make, yes, that will impact the money that's available.
Thank you.
If I'm understanding it correctly, you Deirdre, yeah?
Oh yes, sorry.
Yes. If I'm understanding it correctly, because we're having a conversation about need, and I think this is really useful. I think this has actually been a helpful clarification for the purpose of the debate. But is it the case that, there seems to be this difficulty in understanding what the Treasury is actually saying, and we've tried, and we'll probably try again to have the Treasury give evidence to us on this to understand it. But the Treasury's fundamental position is that need is, they don't treat it as in the same way that the devolved administrations do. They acknowledge it, and they have accepted, and they now refer to devolved administrations being funded at need, albeit at the minute Northern Ireland is basically at its level of need, and Scotland and Wales, based on the 2010 numbers, are well above theirs, or certainly far significantly above versus where we are. But is it? What I'm trying to establish is fundamentally the Treasury almost doesn't totally engage in the idea of need. They just say, well, you're at it, and that's it, because the fundamental funding mechanism is the Barnett formula. Well, so it's not like there's not a kind of the Barnett formula is what fundamentally provides the allocation, and then after that it's things are done to potentially get you hopefully to your level of need, but with no guarantees, that are kind of fundamentally set out in, for example, the statement of funding policy. It's not in the statement of devolved funding policy, is it, that any devolved administration should be at its level of need?
Well, it's the fiscal framework is the framework for the agreement on funding. So Barnett is obviously in the statement of funding, and that's the core and the basis. But obviously with Wales in 2016, ourselves in 2024, there's an additional mechanism, if you like, to try and ensure funding at or around need.
So far be it from me to defend Treasury. But just in response to your kind of question, do they recognise need? Well, Wales have their fiscal framework, which is based around a relative need, and obviously the Minister's predecessor agreed an interim fiscal framework, which need as an element of that. So Is there a recognition in Treasury that they need to feed funds that need? Well, yes, because we have the inter-fiscal framework in place, and Wales have the same. There is not a pressure to have that in Scotland. So,
well above their level.
Clearly,
the Barn formula works.
So the question now is a broader one. What is the necessary level of funding? So you can work out what your need is, but what's the level of funding that is required across the administrations?
One practical question then is, we have the interim fiscal framework, and I know you guys work very hard in achieving that, but the interim fiscal framework does not. When will it be a final fiscal framework? Do we expect to see a final fiscal framework alongside a budget? Is that what it'll have to be? Will the two have to go together?
No. So a fiscal framework is a much broader document. It's a much broader piece.
I mean, I accept that, but I suppose what the current position seems to be from the Minister that even if we accept that we are clearly funded in relative terms not as well as Scotland and Wales, based on both your and the Fiscal Council analysis, we have no guarantee that, as the Fiscal Council said yesterday, we have no guarantee that we might object to this position, that the Treasury is going to engage meaningfully on that discrepancy. So our negotiation leverage, or the negotiation leverage of the Executive, is not setting a budget. I suppose what I'm trying to understand is, are we holding out on agreeing a budget in order that they agree in a different fiscal framework with a more generous, or perhaps you might call it equitable, need calculation?
Well, the minister. So I wouldn't describe it as holding out on a budget. So the minister put out a draft budget around the start of the year, based on his responsibility to do so and the funding available. The feedback from ministers across the Executive is that wasn't sufficient, and they couldn't live within that. So it's the minister's intent to put a multi-year budget in place as soon as possible. But given the financial position, the focus at the minute is trying to reach agreement with the UK government on a more sustainable funding arrangement. Funding is one element of a fiscal framework. It's the most immediate, most pressing one at this point in time. There are other elements of it, the devolution of additional fiscal powers, which the Minister has been very strong and kind of pressing that they need to be part of the package. But the focus at the moment is on dealing with this very immediate budget pressure. Once we're through that, we would expect those broader discussions on things like tax, on things like some of the technicalities, which is how this works. We talked about the buffer zones.
The detail, so we'll come on just brief for the record on the devolution of tax powers afterwards, but just on specifically on where we are right now, what you're saying is that there's obviously immediate pressing desire to get a budget agreed. Certainly we are pressing for that, but is that the position is that if there's not if the Executive doesn't agree a budget, its legal spending totals will be well below need, because it'll be a 5% cut in last year's budget. And that's a lot. That's significantly less than need.
Well, work is you're taking that right to the outcome, which would be you'd arrive at the end of the year if no agreements reached. But all the efforts of the department are focusing on those engagement with the Treasury and enabling us to get a budget in place which will enable full spend.
Okay. Fingers crossed. And the final bit is on the devolution of fiscal powers. You're saying basically that is a priority, but one that there hasn't been detailed engagement yet with the Treasury, because it's you're still in the discussions about the need calculation.
The focus has been on funding. So as maybe said when we were here previously, the Minister had set out to his Executive colleagues what he saw as a pathway towards a full fiscal framework, with devolution included as part of that. Yeah. So there will need to be discussions with the Executive, with UK government. What my team is doing, is within the capacity that we have, is that we're seeking to advance the preparatory work that we can, that would inform any discussions at the Executive table, which is where the first discussions would need to be before any agreement would be reached on what powers an Executive might reach.
Preparatory work for discussions, within the Executive, which would come in advance of discussions with the UK Treasury. You're not preparatory work in terms of hiring tax collectors and things like that.
No. Okay. This is internal research.
Feels like it's been at that stage for a while, but I recognise that some of these are political blocks, not yours. But thank you very much for coming and giving us evidence. We may come back, but certainly that was particularly useful around the need calculation and other stuff. Thank you very much, Tony, Eamon and Aidan. Appreciate your time.
Thank you, members.
All right, members, we're now going to go on to an LCM. Excuse me. I was going to suggest that we, and particularly in the context of the Fiscal Council report yesterday, I think it's important that we, for the record, get the UK, a response from the UK government. I would suggest we write directly to the Treasury and ask once again for evidence, if people are minded to, whether that's officials or ministers, because I think it's now verging on slightly scandalous that we have. Personally, I think it's scandalous we don't have a budget, but I also think it's scandalous that the Treasury won't come and give evidence to a devolved finance committee about these matters. But I think we should ask for a response to the specific points that are in this, and any other commentary they want to give is, of course, up to them and welcome. But I think it would be, I think, helpful, and given everything we have established about the devolution guidance notes, I think we can't really have an excuse for not giving us a response to our reasonable request for a response from them. Yes, Deputy Chair.
Yeah, thank you. Is there any chance of the Fiscal Council giving us a briefing on the report?
Coming in next week.
They're next week, and in a sense, they've already.
Yeah.
Their response is the paper they published yesterday, I think, which they can talk to tomorrow next week. Okay, members are content with all that? Oh yes.
So we can do tiny suspension.
We do a very slight suspension for comfort breaks. Members are doing very quick comfort breaks.
This will be utterly fast.
This will be extremely fast.
So if we just pause momentarily.
Members, okay with that?
Marion.
As long as we're home for 9 p.m, I'm okay.
Senate Chamber. Sound. 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 Senate Chamber.
For facilitating that, we will be brief. I don't think it'll be a hugely long session, but we're very grateful for you coming and being patient. Okay.
Oh, there we go. That's us, Chair.
Okay, members, we are now present back with a short break there. So on the 9th of June, sorry, this is this is an LCM related. We have discussed it before. It's the Cybersecurity and Resilience Network Information Systems Bill. We had an initial discussion on it some months ago. If members are content, Hansard will report on this. They'll be with us soon. On 9th of June, the Department of Finance formally laid an LCM in the Business Office Understanding Order 42.4a. It falls to this committee to scrutinise it, and we have 15 working days to report on the LCM if we so wish. We did take oral evidence of this on the 26th of November. Today's session will supplement the committee's evidence on this matter. I believe it was Paul who came to give us evidence. Was it now?
Paul Duffy.
Paul Duffy. So we have papers from 107, including briefing from the department and a transcript of the previous session and some other bits. So we have in front of us Lorraine McCaffrey, who is Deputy Director for Digital and Cyber, and also Paul Grocott, who's Deputy Secretary for Digital Shared Services. Please give us, Paul, an opening statement, and then members indicate if you're to ask any questions.
Thanks, Chairman. Thank you, members, for the opportunity to brief you on the bill. I was talking to the clerk just briefly in the interview. Thank you very much for the clerk and the team for arranging the session as well. So we're very grateful for you accommodating us on the agenda. Before turning to the LCM specifically, in my sort of relatively short time in post in this role, it's clear that cyber security and resilience is much wider than the contents of the bill. So I very much welcome an opportunity to come back to the committee in time to talk about the wider brief, and we can sort of, through the clerk and the Dallow, we can arrange that. Turning to the bill itself, it updates the existing network and information systems regulation from 2018 So the purpose of the bill is to strengthen cybersecurity and resilience framework for essential services and digital infrastructure. There are 3 practical ways in which the bill does this. So first of which is it widens the scope. So for example, it brings into categories such as medium and large data centres, large load controllers, medium and large managed service providers, and designated critical suppliers. Although our assessment at this stage is that widening the scope won't impact the responsibilities of us as a competent authority here. The second area is that it strengthens the regulatory toolkit. So, for example, it updates arrangements around incident reporting, information sharing and enforcement. And then the third and final area is around making the framework more adaptable. So, for example, it enables further changes to be made through secondary legislation and then also responding to imminent or emerging cyber events. Although the subject matter of the bill is technical, it shouldn't be understood as an IT issue. It's more about governance, resilience and accountability, so effectively making sure that the right duties, oversight arrangements and powers are in place.
Just say a bit more about that to clarify. This it's not creating lots of new powers.
No, exactly. So exactly.
It's clarifying, yeah.
Yeah, so from the department's perspective, this is an evolution in our role.
Yeah.
So it's strengthening the existing network, as I mentioned from the regulations, the bill from back in 2018.
Yeah.
So rather than it creating a whole new framework, it just builds on that, and it doesn't fundamentally change what we do as a competent authority. So just to focus on that briefly, so that the role of the department as the competent authority here, so we are the competent authority for operators of essential services in 5 sectors. They are energy, transport, drinking water, supply, distribution and health. And it is our assessment that this supports our assessment is that we support the overall policy intent of the bill, because cyber risk does not respect geographical boundaries of those sectors, so it's important where possible to facilitate collaboration across the sectors. On legislative consent specifically, so the Department for Science, Innovation and Technology, DCIT, and ourselves agree that consent is required for 22 clauses, so they're in your pack. So broadly they cover strengthened regulatory arrangements, guidance, information gathering, enforcement, appeals, penalties and information sharing. In your pack, we also advise that we consider consent is required on a further 6 clauses. So they are 15, 18, 25, 26, 38 and 52 in your pack. Our assessment is because they relate to incident reporting, information sharing, strategic priorities, consultation on those same priorities, codes of practice and enforcement, that they affect the statutory framework within which DOF exercises its functions as the competent authority, and therefore we have included them. While there is a difference between DCIT and DOF on the devolution analysis, that doesn't affect the substantive analysis that I mentioned earlier, and that it is our recommendation that the relevant powers should be extended.
What is the differences for the record? Do you have a different analysis of which bits are devolved?
Yes, essentially DCIT put forward the 22 clauses. It's our assessment that should have included an additional 6, which is why we've included them in your pack.
Okay.
And it's our recommendation that we still agree consent for them. It's just
what are the bits they left out in summary, if it's not too technical?
Yeah, so that's incident reporting, information sharing, the ability of the Secretary of State to set strategic priorities and conduct a consultation on those same strategic priorities, codes of practice that may be issued from the DCIT, and then enforcement. So we still recommend that they're relevant and consent should be applied. In many aspects, devolution analysis is a subjective exercise, so it doesn't materially affect our assessment of the bill. It's just that DCIT didn't agree with our assessment, and it is what it is.
Okay.
You briefly covered the timescales there. So the executive agreed on the 28th of May to bring forward a legislative consent motion. That was laid before the Assembly on the 9th. I understand where a date for debate is to be scheduled is likely to be into the next session, but that allows for the Assembly to notify Parliament of its position before the final stage of the bill goes through the Lords. That was in terms of a brief opening statement. That was all I planned. Lorraine and I are very happy to answer any questions that members may have.
Okay, thank you very much. I suppose if I'm summarising, this is about improving resilience to cyber attacks, and how it does that is it improves provisions for information sharing and a whole series of other technical things which kind of clarify responsibilities in VIRES. Is that right?
Yeah, certainly, and I think so. From a DSIT perspective, it recognises that the operators of essential services is now wider. So, data centres, for example, are now within scope because bad actors will target them, and there's just because of the nature of the impact of a cyber attack on something like a data centre, it is now within scope, and therefore bringing those in scope also requires regulators to have the necessary tools in their toolbox to respond to that threat.
Does there need to be a kind of an all-island or cross-border context here, given, for example, the single electricity market and obviously we know there are data centres, many data centres on this island.
Yeah.
Just understanding that and how whether there's any intersection there or any thought given to that.
Yeah, so the South will be implementing the NIS2 directive, which is the EU acquis.
Yeah.
And while the UK stepped outside of the acquis, so there are differences, but this bill and then the NIS2 directive allows for broader coherence. That allows regulators on the island of Ireland to sort of cooperate in a much more seamless way. The devolution analysis from DSIT considered the single electricity market and confirmed that it doesn't affect the Article 9 and Annex 4, I think it is from memory, from the Windsor Framework.
Okay.
It's not particularly on the SAM. Yeah.
But it is something that you're alive to?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. I'll bring in membership if anybody else wants to go. Deputy Chair.
Yeah, thanks very much, and welcome to your role as
Thank you
well.
very
It's
much.
good to see you here. In terms of this one, just a couple of notes that were just in the file. It said that DSIT were seeking consent for 22 clauses, and you've asked for further consideration given to 6 clauses, even though DSIT are saying the consent isn't required for them. Just wondering why is there a wee bit of a dispute over those?
Just as I mentioned the chair earlier, it's just it's a subjective analysis of what requires legislative consent. From our position, those particular clauses affect the role of the competent authority, and therefore it would be appropriate for us to seek consent, and that's why they're included in the bill that's put forward to the Assembly. DSIT didn't agree with that. They think they remain within reserved competence and therefore weren't amongst the 22 that they put forward originally.
You're just being a bit maybe more prudent?
Yeah, possibly, yeah.
Yeah.
Listen, from our assessment, it affects what we do, and that's why we're ensuring that the Assembly understands that, and both our Minister, in terms of his remit and what we're doing.
It's not really a dispute, it's just you're deciding to take a wee
Yeah,
bit extra, maybe good practice.
Yeah, in terms of our recommendation from the bill, it's not material.
Okay, no, that's grand. And then just and for clarity, it says in my notes, so by going forward with this just keeps us in terms of parity with the rest of the United Kingdom and also the Republic of Ireland?
So it's not exact parity because we're
Okay.
outside of the acquis, but the direction of travel is convergence on an international scale. So I guess the counterfactual would be what we don't want is the North and us as a competent authority being in a separate regime from Britain or South and the rest of the EU.
Yeah, no, that's good because as I say, it's just when it's saying parity with Europe and Britain, it's just the clarity. I just represent a border constituency, and sometimes when it comes to these types of things, you fall into an unusual area. But no, that's good that it's parity right across the board. No, thanks very much. Nothing further from me. Thanks, Chair.
Okay, thank you very much. Brian Kingston's going on.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for your attendance. So, DOF has been the NIS competent authority since 2018. Is that correct? And this bill going through Westminster will expand their remit, their powers, or the amount of reporting to them?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, so there's 3 areas. So that one is the sectors that could be included within the remit of regulation has changed, but we don't think that will affect us just because of the thresholds are very much targeted at the size of operations within GB. The toolkit that regulators use will affect us, so around incident reporting and the information that we can gather from operations of essential services, and then our ability to share that information amongst regulators will change how we do our role as a competent authority.
In terms of the finances of it, Clause 17, do you see these extra responsibilities incurring significant cost, and who would be, if the department did want to levy charges, who actually would be paying it? Would it be the data centres and that sort of thing, or any of the authorities, arm's length bodies, whatever, that would be reporting to them?
Yeah, so that particular clause puts in place the power for competent authorities to recover costs. There will be secondary legislation that we brought through from DCIT that will add a little bit more detail to that. At that stage, we will have to consider our position as a competent authority for Northern Ireland, or whether you'd want to sort of draw down that. Obviously, there would be quite a significant amount of regulatory impact assessment to be completed to decide whether you would want to use those powers or not. But that would be after the point at which DCIT has brought forward the secondary legislation.
And do you see it, the extra powers or the extra remit, incurring a significant extra cost? I presume there's already people dedicated to this task?
So there's a team there, and within Lorraine's team, we think we can manage that up to now, but it's something that we'll absolutely have to keep under review, and also understand what the secondary legislation requires us to do, and make an assessment on that basis.
Okay.
Sure. Deirdre
Hargey.
Yeah, no, I suppose it was just the wee bit around in it where it's given the Secretary of State powers, it's saying in terms of a statement of strategic priorities to set the outcomes for the regulators, and then also around further provisions, and it's just to see if any of this would sit or in contradiction of the 6 clauses that you've highlighted that you believe could fall under devolved matters, and are there processes in place then for engagement at those points when they are updating?
Yeah, so that includes the 6.
Yep.
So that particular power is in the 6 that we think requires legislative consent that we're putting forward. But we still think that that is appropriate, given the nature of the cross-cutting emerging threats. Yep. It is appropriate that the Secretary of State may want to provide sort of strategic priorities on those issues, and it will require consultation with us, both in setting those priorities but also reporting on them.
Aye, so that's added, they have to consult.
Yeah,
them.
absolutely.
Okay,
that's within the bill. Yeah, it's
yeah.
It's a requirement of the Secretary of State to consult.
And do you foresee any other amendments coming, either at the Lord stage before the consideration's completed, that will impact on devolved matters? Do you foresee any at this point?
So there hasn't been any amendments to the bill as it's gone through the Commons. I'm not sure. I wouldn't like to predict what would happen in the Lord. So I haven't. We wouldn't know, but we'll have to react to that as and when the Lords consider it.
And it was just on that bit in terms of, obviously we're on an island here then, and with data centres here, and I suppose are you assured, there may be data centres on both parts of the island obviously, but information might flow between the two. So are you assured what the Irish government are doing in terms of the EU regulations and what's being done here, that there won't be any falling between the stools or loopholes?
Yeah, absolutely. So my experience coming into this role is the cooperation between regulators is impressive and extensive, and both from Whitehall-based organisations, Dublin-based organisations, and their willingness to bring us into conversations is very open. It is described as a team sport, and they live by those values. So absolutely, I can attest to that. And Lorraine, do you want to add something on sort of the engagement that you're leading?
Yeah, there'll be significant engagement going on with the OESs over the summer months, and all the regulators are currently in engagement with DCIT at the moment on several aspects of the bill. So we're very much aware of the importance in ensuring that takes place. So we started early engagement already in Cyber NI Week, and that will continue now throughout the rest of this year.
Okay, that's brilliant. Thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Okay, members, no one else has indicated that they wish to ask a question. So at this point, we'll thank our witnesses. And I don't think we need anything else at this point. So there will be a draft report, and the LCM will come forward, and we will consider it at next week's meeting. Thank you very much. Thank you both.
Chair, thank you, members.
Paul, Lorraine. Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Okay, so members, we're now going to go on to the rest of the business, which hopefully we'll get through promptly enough. Agenda item 7 is chairperson's business. And the first one is to write a welcome to the new chair of the Scottish Finance and Public Administration Committee. We worked well with their predecessor via the Interparliamentary Finance Committee forum, so if members are content, we'll write a welcome to them. Agenda item is draft minutes of the meeting on the 10th of June. It's at page 157. If members are content with them, I will sign the minutes. Yes, okay. Agenda item 9 is matters arising. So there was a whole load of paper, which I'm not going to read through. You'll be disappointed to hear. They start at 164 of the meeting pack. They're in red are the suggested actions. They have all been effectively agreed by us collectively, not raising any dissent. However, for the purpose of this meeting, I have one that I do want to raise a bit more on and bring it back for discussion at a future date. That relates to, it's something we raised on the 29th of April. We asked the department for more on cross-border financial services. I'm really keen. I should say we had there was an Ulster Bank presentation earlier this week yesterday, in fact, that the Deputy Chair and I both attended, where they were presenting on what they're doing on financial inclusion. I think it shows that there is interest from financial services organisations in engaging more at that evolved level, and I think us holding them to account in terms of what they're doing for small businesses and families here is probably part of that. So I want us to keep on some of our actions. I would like us to bring that back at a future date, the cross-border financial services one, whenever we discuss actions from our inquiry, because it sounds like Finance UK really aren't doing anything about it, or aren't, and basically they've effectively told the Minister kind of not really doing very much, really, and I think we need to know.
That was listed as item 1011, dialogue rate out response 29th of April, cross-border financial services, which is at the bottom of page 165 of the pack. So we can bring that back when it's appropriate, and that's when we do further work on the banking inquiry.
If members are content with that, we'll then, just for the record, so we do have a response from the new Chief Secretary to the Treasury, which is about where the executive budget discussion is. There is a FISC meeting. Did you say what date it's happening in June? No. I think I would like us, in what we discussed earlier on, in writing back to the Chief Secretary of the Treasury, I think it would be useful for us. It's there to note, but what I would like to suggest we do is to write back on a couple of things, to ask for the Department, the Treasury's response to what we've heard today around need calculations, number one. Number two, to ask what urgent discussion she is having, or the Treasury is having, around resolving the budgetary situation with the Executive, because clearly they are a party to that, whether they like it or not. And lastly, to ask for, at earliest convenience, which will realistically not be before the summer, evidence from some of the Treasury around need. Now, we would hope by that stage there's a budget agreed, but obviously we hope that, at Christmas. So if members are content with those, I've just picked those out. Those are specific things I would like us to follow up on if members are content. One is that letter to the Chief Secretary of the Treasury, and the other is around financial services. There are other significant matters arising there, but if members are content with those, the other actions agreed are in red. Okay, now I'm going to go through other matters arising which have not been agreed by exception. So 3.9.2, excuse me, is the Dallow extract from the 20th of May, and there's a few of them which I'm going to go through. So, pardon me, items 9.3 to 9.11 relate to the Head of the Civil Service oral briefing follow-up, and that's at page 170 of the meeting pack. Excuse me. We previously asked the Department for extensive follow-up information from the oral briefing with the Head of the Civil Service, and the Department has provided to us a copy of the Independent Board Effectiveness Review of the NI Civil Service, the final terms of reference for the next board, terms of reference for the PFG committee, terms of reference for the various other committees that are, shoot off the next board, and details of civil servants earning 100k or more that was referenced earlier on by the Deputy Chair. Also, page 210 of the meeting pack, there's a response to the committee's recommendation around publishing quarterly sickness absence statistics. In respect of that, the Department has assured us that it will continue to provide six monthly civil service dashboard on a confidential basis, a confidential basis. That's interesting.
I think, Chair, that doesn't necessarily mean secretive, but it means that we wouldn't be publishing anything ourselves.
Okay.
And it's just restricted to the committee, and we don't circulate any wider.
So, okay, members, just on these, number one, I think we should, given now we are relatively close to the end of the discussion, I think we should have some of these responses as specific things, bringing the Deputy Chair now, as specific points to discuss when we next have deliberations on our committee inquiry. Because I haven't been able to go through all this correspondence exhaustively, and some of this will be very important, including the board effectiveness review. I guess I'm a wee bit concerned about the sickness absence statistics being confidential, and I would ask the department for clarity on why that is, and whether it's satisfactory for something to effectively end. These were published statistics and aren't going to be now. Okay, but bring in Deputy Chair.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I just wanted to say it's good to see this quite timely. It hasn't taken very long for this level of information to come back, and it's all very, very helpful information. It's all what we asked for, and as you said, there's a number of substantive things that have come back that I think we need to look at in that wee bit more detail. So yeah, I just wanted to say it's good to see it coming through so quickly, because there is quite a lot there and a lot of food for thought. But I would support what you say in terms of coming back to it in more detail in another meeting.
Yeah, and I mean, like the Baker Tilly Mooneymoor review is very long, and it's not that long, but it's long enough that it will require a more detailed discussion, I think, as part of our deliberations. Okay, members, you can tell we'll add all that to the evidence base for the inquiry. Now we're going to go on to the tabled pack. 9.12 is Dalla readout response in relation to a 6th of May query. We request a regular update in the timeline for cash flow forecast spend profiles, specifically with an indication if the pattern shown in the VOA voting account drawdown was expected at this time of year. The department has provided a response to us, indicating that further updates will be provided each month. So, I don't know if any members wish to discuss it. Can I first of all suggest that we share this with other statutory committees and the audit committee? Bring in the Deputy Chair.
Thank you. This will sound repetitive because I have said it a number of times before. Like, it is good to have this, but it's 1 month at a time. I think that where you're looking forward a full year and you have a full year in arrears of what the cash pattern is, why can't we see it in terms of the full year? I would be keen to see that. I know we'd asked for it before for even just the Department of Finance centrally, but just to have a view as to where the peaks and troughs are for the year. And then obviously, because last year has happened, and you could be setting it beside that. It just, every time we ask for this, we keep getting it like this, where you've got just 1 month and then just the month before and then the outturn. So you're not really seeing the flow of what they're expecting.
And do you mean the comparison? So, I mean, like, so for example, what we don't have here, and because it has April 26th outturn, but the column to the left that would be helpful is what the forecast was.
Yeah, but even just for the year, I've asked a few times in terms of for the full financial year, given that you're looking at the project,
full year forecast.
Just to have a graph of where you expect the money to be up and down.
I think we should ask for that. I also think it would be helpful for them to come back with the table that is at page 673.
Yeah, a bit more user friendly.
But also just like what the April 26th forecast and outturn was, so we can compare the two easily. We will have the May 26th forecast. If members are content with that, can I also suggest while we're doing that, we ask the department. There's supposed to be and it's mentioned in the Fiscal Council report yesterday. We're supposed to have the first publication of actually it might be this data in June of an outturn data. I'll come back to that.
The Minister will bring that as a statement then?
Yeah, the Minister probably will be bringing that as a statement. We also have officials up in a fortnight who can go into this in more depth.
Okay.
But as the Deputy Chair said, because you're effectively reprofiling last year's spend, they could easily provide the data on that, because that will now be established. It's not a forecast, it's an actual outturn, so that would be useful to see the two compared to each other.
Yeah, okay. Members can tell with that, so we'll move on then to 9.13. which again is outturn and forecast outturn data. We asked for details we asked for detail on a number of issues related to the outturn and forecast outturn. The department has provided assurance in relation to transformation underspend, DOF specific DEL assessments, information on integrated timelines, and detail on capital DEL easements. Members are content we will copy the detail on capital DEL easements to other statutory committees, and indeed the Assembly Audit Committee, if members are content.
Okay.
Okay. So, agenda item 10 is correspondence. 10.1 is Hansard transcript of the ministerial briefing of the 3rd of June. So that is page 212, that's to note. Agenda item 11 is the draft forward work programme. We're obviously getting very close to the end of term. So, I don't know if the
Chair, we just flag up the 1st of July, the wider budgetary briefing. That's been scheduled and we now have officials' names for that. We had scheduled a briefing on the shared prosperity update, but officials have indicated that the team isn't fully in place, so we're going to shift that down to the autumn because it's not worth having a new team in yet. First meeting in September, we're seeking members' agreement to do it on the 9th of September rather than the 16th. We have a pending invitation on the 16th. We're just getting written confirmation of it. Oh, we're not core yet. Oh no. I can still talk for a second.
Still talk,
No,
yes.
I'm going to talk for a second, Chair. So we're waiting that pending. We're waiting for that pending response, and that's because literally we only have 2 meetings left. There's not a lot else to say. We are now looking very heavily at September. Yeah, so we're now expecting that invitation by the end of the week. So if members are agreed, then we meet our first meeting on the 9th of September, and then we'll be looking at a potential joint session with an Oireachtas counterpart committee in
On the
the
16th?
16th. Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
So, okay, agreed.
Perfect,
We'll
thank
propose
you.
that. The members, just on the forward, I did just want to flag and open it up for. We don't need to decide anything now, but like the next couple of weeks, we will need to be live to getting some kind of urgent briefing from the department. I think in terms of the budgetary position, in order to understand what happens on the 1st of August and what plans and preparations are being made. So if members are content, can I just ask that the clerks are liaising with, yes, we are starting early next week, which I wanted to mention.
So, Chair, we're just going to have to get agreement on that starting early next week. If members are content, we start at 1.
Agreed.
Yep.
We've another heavy day.
Yeah.
And the Senate will be available, so we can start earlier. Perfect. Thank you, members.
And we might just want to keep alive the possibility of having some kind of additional briefing if we need to, or additional meeting, even if it's just to give us a factual update on the position regarding the legalities of the budget absence before we break up.
We have the officials coming on
We
the
do
1st of
the
July,
budget
Chair, so
okay.
that's hopefully a good point.
Okay. So on that note, we're going to go to any other business. Does anyone have any other business? Deputy Chair.
Yeah, I just wondered, can we ask how, I know obviously the outturn figures are very close, but the status of how the different departments and things are getting on with progressing their statutory accounts. We're coming up to summer recess. Just wondering if there was any update on that. And as well, just thanks to everyone there was 2 big pieces of legislation through this week.
Yes,
and I know just in other committees, everybody's sort of panicking with lots of legislation in the air and what they're going to do over the summer. It's just been timed perfectly well, those 2 substantive bits. And then we also have Monday evening time.
Yeah, Chair, just to remind members about that, Monday evening, 7 p.m, we have the event around the baby loss certificates. So baby loss certificates should be effectively live that day. And really this is just a celebration that the Minister's organised with stakeholders, and obviously the committee's been invited to that. So I know the sitting is scheduled to go late on Monday, so members are here. So we will make that work as best we possibly can. I'm in on the Monday as well for lobby duty, so we'll make that work.
We're upstairs. In the Long
Yes,
Gallery.
is it Long Gallery or is it 115? I checked back and then I put an email out with details.
It would be good if we were there when the minister's invited
yes.
the committee. Yeah.
And for photographs.
Yeah. Thanks, Chair.
Perfect. Okay, members. So move on to date, time and place of next meeting, which will be here in the Senate chamber next week, as I mentioned, at the slightly earlier time of 1 o'clock. We'll put the question now. The committee does adjourn. The committee's adjourned.
Thank you, Chair. Marion?
Right.
Senate Chamber. Sound.